Conversation.
I just need to find a way to activate the spiders man inside every single human at the London Internet Exchange in order for them to become my willing servants. But what could the trigger word be? Well, I better start saying every single word in the human language. I'll start with the English dictionary. Okay, hey, aardvark, aardwolf.
Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Cameron Reigle.
And happy holidays to anyone out there who has decided to partake in any of them. It's been a busy year here at DK Vine, here at Donkey Kong Universe Fandom. It's been a busy, honestly, 4 months or so. And on top of like all the usual stuff, like, you know, run-of-the-mill stuff like theme parks opening up and all of that, it's also been a particularly busy year for Donkey Kong anniversary milestones. I'm talking about those big round numbers that really draw the eyeballs. Like, oh, that's impressive. Ooh, there's a big 0 or a 5 after that. Ooh, like that's better than a 6 or a 1. So, of course, the monumental one, or the most monumental one that we dealt with here at the Kongversation was the 30th anniversary of the original Donkey Kong Country. Kind of the true beginning of the DKU. But then we also acknowledged Donkey Kong 64's 25th anniversary, and even Donkey Konga's 20th anniversary. Oh, do you remember where you were, Cameron, when Donkey Konga came to stores?
I imagine it was not buying Donkey Konga.
I still remember walking into the GameStop and seeing that they had it on the GameCube demo kiosk, complete with a DK bongos affixed to it. Oh, those were the glory days, were they not? But there's actually another Donkey Kong game that had a big, sexy number for its birthday this year, and it actually came out around the time of Donkey Konga, and it sort of served as something of a bastion of hope for any Donkey Kong fans who felt disgruntled in the early angst of the buyout era, all the uncertainty for the future or even present direction of Donkey Kong. And here we had a classic adventure being brought to an entirely new generation. I'm talking, of course, about Donkey Kong Country 2 for the Game Boy Advance, the second of Rare's DKC remakes for the system that their handheld team began developing mere months after Microsoft purchased the studio. Come hell or high water, they were going to get that sweet, sweet Donkey Kong cash for as long as they could. So on this episode of The Kongversation, we are giving the spotlight treatment to DKC2 GBA.
Emphasis on light.
Before we get to, you've had that one in the chamber for a while, haven't you?
No.
Okay, all right. You're just quick on your feet. That's right. Before we get into it, though, just a quick reminder: DK Vine is on Twitch. I have brought back DK Vine Done Slow to join the bastions of our Twitch channel, being DK Vine Stream of Thieves every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, and the Idaho Crew Presents every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And I have been streaming DK Vine Done Slow Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. I have no clue if that time or even day will stay the same in the new year, but I just finished Donkey Kong Land. It went well, no catastrophes. So yeah, it felt good. I'm going to go do Donkey Kong Land 2 in January. So be sure to subscribe to our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/DKVine. And then if you miss them, I am putting the VODs up on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube because I also have lots of fun video content coming your way in the new year about Donkey Kong, Banjo-Kazooie, Conker, and so much more. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and pull up that Banjo-Tooie Jolly's Salty Yule Log fireplace I made thanks to the Banjo-Tooie bug where the music fails to load. I guess after you've been playing the game for so long that as a memory saving issue, it just doesn't load the music of a world. And I was just like, ooh, I could take advantage of this and make a Yule log in Jolly's Tavern, which is what I did. It's 4 hours long. I hope you pull it up for your family during this festive season. Of course, we live stream these recordings of the Kongversation for our $5 and up patrons. If you want to support independent Donkey Kong journalism, then be sure to visit our Patreon and think about, giving some money our way. Maybe $1 a month, maybe more, honestly. But if you go in for the $5 and up tier, you can listen to these episodes of the Kongversation as we record them. You can hear all of the little mistakes we make, all the little slips of the tongue, all of the just incorrect information. We don't know anything about Donkey Kong. We don't know anything about any of this. We fix it all in post, but Just Andre, Porygon Q, Me Muppet, Freezer, March Rose, they know the truth because they're with us right now. Just Andre says, when do we get Diddy Kong Racing or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe done slow? Well, I can tell you this much. You will get Diddy Kong Racing when it comes to NSO. Because, of course, I'm going to do that. But I'm sure the Idaho crew will also be, trying to, climb over my body trying to get to that one first as well. So we just might turn the Twitch channel into a Diddy Kong Racing receptacle for a few months after it comes out on NSO. Look at me being all optimistic when it comes out on NSO, not if. No, it's definitely when. Definitely when. So, Meme Up, it says Mario Kart 9 is coming out soon. Yeah, I've heard that rumor now for the last 8 years or so.
I wonder if Mario Kart 8's going to come out again.
Mario Kart 8 Deluxe 2? Yeah. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe GBA. They have to,
Turbo HD remix.
Yeah. Cameron, how have you been?
Doing good.
Feel like I haven't touched base with you in a while. You haven't been on the show in a while. How's life treating you?
Good. Also on Blue Sky. Now streaming with the Idaho crew. Most Tuesdays and independently on Wednesdays. We do non-DK Vine streams at Agent Ape's channel, Special Agent Ape on Twitch.
You stream non-DKU games on Wednesdays, so I really don't care. But then you stream Soul Calibur 6 on our Twitch channel this last Tuesday, so you find a way to justify it. I'm just like, you got me. I can't say.
Yeah, as part of our Star Fox marathon, the Idaho crew attempted to make various Star Fox characters in a character creator very much not designed to do that. To surprising success.
I haven't been able to catch up with it. I tuned in for a little bit, but I was basically on my deathbed after getting out over 100 holiday cards that day. So I was icing my hand because of course I have to hand address and write a little message on each one because I try to be so thoughtful and I end up hating the decision every single year. So I did not get to, I saw you making Peppy and it gave me nightmares later that night.
Yeah, surprisingly well realized, I would say, considering what we had to work with.
Yeah. I always enjoy those weird avant-garde streams you do where let's make DKU characters in this game that's not DKU and that honestly is not built for such fanciful farcical nonsense. And and it always comes out well, I mean, or at least interesting. It's always interesting. All right. Well, we're of course sort of wrapping up the season here. I've still got 2 more episodes of the Kongversation after this one in 2024 in season 12 because I don't know how to stop. I'm like the bus in the Speed movie. Like if I stop, I will blow up. I'll be taking a couple weeks off in January at the very least, between the end of this season and the beginning of next. I'm not really sure when season 13 is beginning because we have Donkey Kong Country Returns HD coming out in January. So I'm like, well, I can't have that much downtime. But the truth is I'm a little burned out. So I'm going to have to take a few weeks at the very least to kind of get my bearings and, really, really, come back strong because I don't want to be a shattered husk of a Donkey Kong audio shows like host. I need to be at the top of my form for the year ahead because it might be a big year for Donkey Kong. Beyond just Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, we're getting, of course, the theme park opening in the Americas and who knows what else. Switch 2. We don't know what the Switch 2 is going to bring us. So it's going to be a big year. And we got Yuka Replayly. We have Demon Tides. My God, Cameron, we haven't even talked about Demon Turf Neon Splash. That's been on the to-do list. We've got who knows what other surprises coming our way. I was going to say a new Banjo game, but yeah, we'll see Mario Kart 9 before that. So I've got to sleep. Is what I'm saying. I've got to get my rest. So 2 more episodes after this. And on this episode of The Kongversation, we are discussing Donkey Kong Country 2 for the Game Boy Advance. Now, like a lot of DK games from this early to mid buyout era, this had a wildly disparate release calendar across the world. There was no consistency in releases during this time for Donkey Kong games. It was first released in Europe and Oceania, i.e., Australia and I guess New Zealand, on June 25th, 2004, followed closely by a Japanese release on July 1st. However, the Americas didn't get it until November 15th. And I remember being really, really annoyed by that because Aussie Ben, who was part of the DK Vine staff at the time, if you can't tell from his name, lived in Australia. And, he got it months before it was available here. And I don't think people appreciate how good we have it as far as like same day releases nowadays. Like around the world. None of this bifurcated, this region has to wait several months or even a year to get this game. So, yeah, they were still playing this card even 20 years ago. And, of course, you could import GBA games and they would still play on, they weren't region locked. So a lot of people imported the Australian or European GBA cartridges over, and I think they had different title screens by region though, so you weren't getting the full picture because they were giving you a different picture for each continent it came out on. Now, another point we have to make is, like the other Donkey Kong Country games on the Game Boy Advance, this is a remake. This is not a port of the Super Nintendo version. This is a carefully concocted facsimile of the original game, but it is not the original game. They had to recreate it from the ground up. And it's a bit of a misnomer when it comes to these games, which is why we always have to call them remakes and not ports.
Speaking of misnomer, I feel like we should get something very strange out of the way first. We'll exclusively be referring to this game as Donkey Kong Country 2 through the episode and not Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest
Yeah.
because they dropped the subtitle.
There is no subtitle on this one or Donkey Kong Country 3 GBA, which, I mean, at least you know what you're dealing with when you see the logo. You're like, oh, okay, that's the GBA version because there's no subtitle. But it is weird, you know.
It's like, obviously, like, I don't think this tripped anybody up because, like, you know what Donkey Kong Country 2 is. But I feel like this is an interesting choice, given this was the era where, like, not long after this, we'd have Super Mario Brothers 3, Super Mario Advance 4 lining the shelves.
Right, yeah, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it? Was Super Mario Advance 3 Super Mario World 2?
It was Yoshi's Island.
They just shortened it to Yoshi's Island? They didn't have the full Super Mario World? Okay. Because I was going to say that...
It was Yoshi's Island Super Mario Advance 3.
Okay. Because that would have been even more of a mess. But, yeah, there was no, like, Donkey Kong Advance branding for these. They were just the Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong Country 2, Donkey Kong Country 3. I mean, I guess it was cleaner, but of course I prefer the subtitles because Diddy's Conquest is delightful poetry. And it's the first instance of taking something that starts with con and making it Kong, which of course left a big impression on me. So I like that subtitle. I like Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, even though it's kind of ambiguous what the Double Trouble is. People still debate. It's like the Two Towers, Lord of the Rings. Like, what are the Two Towers?
Yeah, one of them is Kitty, guys.
It is Kitty, yeah. Yeah, that's what people don't understand because the marketing of that game was fucked. And they marketed Kitty as this, like, macho badass when the point of Kitty Kong, and I love Kitty Kong. This isn't me smack talking to Kitty Kong. This is me explaining. This is me Kong-splaining Kitty Kong. Kitty Kong is not supposed to be a cool character. Kitty Kong is supposed to be a hindrance to Dixie, the Double Trouble, the Kremlings, and babysitting Kitty. But no subtitle. We have a different credits listing for this game because it was the handheld team, or part of the handheld team, that worked on it. The lead programmer was Trevor Atwood, who did work on the original Donkey Kong Country 2. Other programmers were Paul Rom, James Simmons, and Rob Ware, which that name always trips me up because I always just want to correct it to Rareware. Level graphics by Chris Peel, sprites by Kerry Gunn, and that will come into play in a little bit here. Did a lot of heavy lifting for this one. Design of the new gameplay elements from Gary Richards, a very familiar name to DKU aficionados. The soundtrack was reworked by Jamie Hughes. Sound effects by Evely Novakovic. Vocal clips were reused from, as far as I can tell, Diddy Kong Racing, Donkey Kong 64, and the previous year's Donkey Kong Country GBA. And as such, Grant Kirkhope, Chris Sutherland, Evely Novakovic, and Chris Peel were all credited. And then there were just a whole mess of testers on this game. Quality assurance really wanted to make sure there were no issues. So Hugh Ward was head of Rare QA at the time. The lead testers were Richard Cousins and David Wong. And other QA testers that you might recognize their names include someone by the name of Chris Alcock, as well as Ross Bullimore. So, yeah, it's kind of a stacked little lineup here. A lot of these names are either still at Rare today or at Playtonic. So it's kind of an all-star cast. Now, Cameron, I need to point out something, because this is a spotlight for Donkey Kong Country 2, but I feel like we had to go over this a little bit on our last year's spotlight for the original Donkey Kong Country GBA. We are discussing the new elements for Donkey Kong Country 2 GBA. we are not discussing Donkey Kong Country 2. This is not us going through world by world necessarily, right? We're only discussing what has been changed, what has been augmented, what is different. And as such, because we did a 4-episode spotlight on the original Donkey Kong Country 2 back in 2015 for its then 20th anniversary. So I don't feel like I need to relitigate Donkey Kong Country 2 because most people listening to this know Donkey Kong Country 2. But just in case you're tuning in and you're not at all familiar with Donkey Kong Country 2, here's Donkey Kong Country 2 in about 60 seconds. Donkey Kong gets kidnapped by K. Rool, who's now fancying himself a pirate named Captain K. Rool, takes Donkey Kong to his home island of Crocodile Isle, keeps him in his castle. The Kremlings have to keep Diddy Kong and his new girlfriend Dixie Kong at bay as they traverse the dangerous pirate stronghold of Crocodile Isle to get their friend back. K. Rool falls into the ocean, gets eaten by sharks. K. Rool's dead. Diddy and Dixie explore the Kremlin Lost World deep underneath Crocodile Isle, which is the source of the Kremlings. There is a mystical light at the center of the Lost World that is housed within a crocodile core. We call it the Kremlin source. Turns out K. Rool fell into that, healed his wounds. He fights Diddy and Dixie. His blunderbuss backfires. He falls into the Kremlin source, causes it to back up, ruptures. Crocodile Isle is destroyed, but K. Rool gets away. I didn't get into Swanky or Radley or Squitter, but they'll probably come up throughout this episode.
It's a pretty good sum up.
Yeah. Martro says, I also recommend watching the DK Vine Done slow vids on YouTube of Donkey Kong Country 2. I guess. I don't really, I was like, did that one turn out well or am I embarrassed by that one? Yeah, you can watch it if you want. Martros says it's okay. So let's talk a little bit about the intro to this game. Because just like in Donkey Kong Country GBA, there's a new intro scene and there is a story. They tell the story from the manual in action in the game for the very first time. Which, for any issues I have with this translation of Donkey Kong Country 2, you alluded to the biggest drawback it has visually is that they lightened up a lot of the backgrounds because this was still being made with the original GBA hardware in mind, which of course didn't have a backlight. And because of that, just like with the original Donkey Kong Country GBA, so much of the atmosphere and the ambiance is completely wrecked. Now, I think they did a better job with this one than they did DKC GBA because they made a little bit of allowances. For example, anything that was specifically set at night, they would set at sunset instead to kind of, get around how bad it would look. And it does, change the mood and it doesn't feel as dark and dangerous as the original version does. And it's nowhere near as polished as DKC 3 GBA would be a year later. It's kind of just right in the middle for me. But what do you think?
Yeah, it's one of these situations where they were kind of in a no-win scenario with trying to translate Donkey Kong Country 2 to the GBA because there's no getting around it. The GBA hardware, the original run at GBA hardware was so dimly lit by that screen. No backlight at all. And even by default, it was pretty dim. And this was not an issue unique to Donkey Kong Country 2. Developers ran into well, how do you do games that are dark and moody on the GBA? You can look at early Castlevania GBA stuff and see that everything is much has a kind of watercolor consistency to it. Things are brightened up. But Donkey Kong Country 2 runs into the extra roadblock of, well, they can't just redraw everything in the game to, like, nail down, like, a new aesthetic that conveys the same mood. They're stuck with the pre-rendered graphics they have for the levels. So, like, they do a conversion the best they can, but it's... I feel like this is going to be a common refrain. It's just not ideal for the tone that this game strived to have.
Right. I think we're going to be running into tone quite a bit because I think just like bringing over the basics of the game, they did the best they could. And honestly, I think it looks better than DKC GBA. However, I think the tone gets trampled in a lot of other ways, which we'll get into.
I think that's why, like, I'm personally of the opinion that even though I do think the original Donkey Kong Country GBA shows them hitting the wall hard of this being way too dark of a series to be at all visible on OG GBA hardware, but I feel like the original Donkey Kong Country survives a slight massage in aesthetics and tone a lot better than Donkey Kong Country 2.
Yeah, Donkey Kong Country 2's whole thing was you're going into the darker, dingier, more deadly enemy territory of the Kremlins. And it's called, a darker game, and it's just darker in, like, atmosphere and the tone of the danger that it represents. It's, it's not a gritty...
It's very, very gloomy and sinister.
Yeah.
And it's a hard vibe to convey, especially because we already have a baseline established of what they were going for with the original game just right there.
Sure. Now, if this was your first experience playing Donkey Kong Country 2, which I know for a lot of people it was, I mean, these GBA remakes were, again, paramount to keeping Donkey Kong Country fandom alive during this era when, like, the knives were out for it from the critics and the internet and just general consensus of the aughts. And yet these games found an audience. And we talked about it before. We talked about it on last year's Spotlight episode. It was the success of this trilogy, the first one in particular, but this entire trilogy that led to Donkey Kong Country Returns. So, I am thankful this exists. My preference is always going to be the Super Nintendo version. And I think out of the three, the most significant fault with this one for a particular reason, but that does not mean that I don't like a lot about this, and I don't appreciate or even lionize some of the things it did add to the game, to the adventure, to the canon. And so it's very much a mixed bag for me. And I hope we're going to do it justice. I hope we're not going to fall on one side of, like, being too negative, or we're going to try to paper over its sins and just really, be like, oh, we love everything here at DK Vine. Yay.
However harsh I may get in the following episode, like, it is a net good that this exists. It got eyes on Donkey Kong Country 2 that may have not had eyes on them before. People who may have not had a Super Nintendo or may have been too young to experience it, or were introduced to Donkey Kong through DK64 and were, like, coming on board.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept Donkey Kong Country alive in the zeitgeist a bit longer.
Yeah.
So that it could eventually come back.
Yeah, they were excellent torchbearers, this series, getting us from the lights of the original Donkey Kong Country mania through the darkness of the buyout era. Not darkness as in we're not getting good games. Darkness as in the general consensus was Donkey Kong Country is trash, overrated trash, and it's a good thing Nintendo didn't purchase Rare. Good riddance. We spit on you. Go to hell. And these games got us through that. these games got us to the other side where Nintendo made a new Donkey Kong Country game, which then, of course, led to the theme park that just opened a couple weeks ago in Japan. So Donkey Kong Country is here to stay now, and I think we owe quite a bit to these GBA remakes. But let's get into the intro, Cameron, because, I always throws me whenever I turn this game on. And I did play through this a little bit in preparation for this episode. That opening, Rare logo. This is the first Donkey Kong game to bear the post-Rareware Rare logo. The Rare logo from the buyout era, where they just reduced it to the golden R out of the shield. And then they shortened the name to just Rare from Rareware, which has always been the company's name, but they were branded as Rareware from 94 to 2003. So to see it on that flag, on that pirate flag being raised up on what's presumably the Gangplank Galleon, it's kind of weird. It's kind of like worlds colliding in a way that you forget actually happened. Like, oh, yeah, that's right. Like, Rare was still making Donkey Kong games up until 2007, and this Rare logo appeared in them.
Though, I guess if it is the Gangplank Galleon, it would cause a little bit of a hiccup, because we can see Crocodile Isle in the background with the Gangplank Galleon, crashed to the side.
Oh yeah, I never even noticed that. Okay, well this is Captain Black Eye's ship then.
Yeah, that I feel like we're gonna have you played a GBA Donkey Kong Country game. You're gonna have to do a lot of squint testing. So
yeah, so the new I guess mode selection screen is interesting because we have Diddy Kong standing next to a cannon. Not a cannon as in a clump dressed up as a pirate, but just an actual ship's cannon. And there are 3 different sails. There is the start regular game, which is the main sail. You've got another sail for Diddy's Dash, which is the time trial mode in the game. And then you have another sail for bonus games. And then you have a Kremling in one of the crow's nest, a Clomp, just on lookout. I do really like this select screen. It's just very fun. And then you jump into the cannon and you aim it, and then Diddy gets blasted into that mode. I think this is fun. I like that they didn't skimp on the effort. This isn't just let's faithfully recreate Donkey Kong Country 2, but worse. It's let's create entirely new assets for this game.
These are like the little glimpses in this game of the GBA game trying to establish its own sense of identity apart from the original, so that you're not just drawing constant unfavorable comparisons to it, and kind of make DKC2 its own. And there's some mixed results in that, but there's definitely a considerable effort in it.
Right, and that's why I think these versions are worthwhile. Even in this era where we can play the original Donkey Kong Country 2 on the Nintendo Switch on the go, I would still really like these versions on NSO because there is just enough variance that it's interesting. It's like a director's cut of a movie. It might be a little bit bloated and it might disrupt the flow of what was a masterpiece, but you're still kind of interested in seeing all the new elements and how it changes or adds to the story and your understanding of it. So, on that note, one thing I really do like about this game is the story, the opening cutscene, if you will, which is even more high effort than the intro for Donkey Kong Country GBA, which just took place in the treehouse setting and the Banana Horde cave setting. It was very we're using these assets that are already in the game. This, they created an entirely new, or maybe not entirely new, because I think they just like zoomed in on the map screen of the original Donkey Kong Country to make this work. But you've got Donkey Kong on the beach in his beach chair, sipping on his banana milkshake, and we see his actual abduction by the Kremlings.
Yeah, I really appreciate that they added this. I've like lamented in the past that like DKC3 GBA didn't get one of these because I feel like it's the game in the series that most needs an explanation of what's happening. But
what's the double trouble?
I do think it is very noticeable here that like a lot of these like character sprites are just reused from what they have of the existing pool of animations elsewhere in the game. So there is like somewhat of a machinima feel to it, but you also do, as you say, have a lot of original stuff that they've made bespoke just for this. You have like a whole animation of Funky surfing and wiping out. You have DK sitting in a lounge chair, like sipping on his drink.
Yeah.
The flying croc revealed super early.
Right.
Which I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like it was maybe supposed to be a surprise that these pirates had an airship, but whatever, I'll take it.
We'll get into it when we talk about like the various end games of this remake, because I feel like there's no point in hiding the surprise anymore, considering how they kind of trample on the original intent of Stronghold Showdown. So it's probably fine. I do like you just talk about reusing assets, and yeah, like all they show are the clingers coming down on ropes. The clingers don't actually do anything. Like I guess they help grab Donkey Kong, or whatever, but all we see are two cutlasses, the little Kremlings holding the big swords.
Two cutlasses tie Donkey Kong up, notably two Kremlings that do not have free hands. Their hands have swords in them.
I also love that he's attacked by cutlasses of all Kremlings, because you're like, oh, what Kremlin subdued Donkey Kong? It was a Cruncha, the pirate version of Crusha, or it was a cannon, or
right, like how in DKC 1 GBA, I really like the touch that like Diddy holds his own when the Kremlings try to kidnap him for a good while. It's only when a Crusha comes to attack him that he can't do anything, because Diddy can't fight back against a Crusha, not if he doesn't have a barrel.
Right, there's some logic there. I mean, granted, when you have 4 swords coming at you, I'm not talking about a Zelda game either, you are probably outmatched when all you have is a milkshake. You could chuck that milkshake at them, but that's only going to temporarily solve your problem. So I guess they hacked him up a little bit. I mean, we don't see any blood, but, there had to be some cuts and abrasions from this. They did smash his beach chair, and they leave a note behind. And we also see Donkey Kong then tied up on the flying croc, just like he is in the K. Rool duel boss fight. And he's there with Captain K. Rool. He's there with a Kaboing, a cannon, and a crook. Which, again, you're giving away some visuals super early, but as far as like telling the story, we finally have it explained how they got him to Crocodile Isle, and it makes sense. It's the most logical thing, is they would use the flying croc to kind of swoop in and swoop out.
Like from the perspective of somebody who already knows how this story goes, I kind of appreciate the contextualization of like, oh, this is how they pulled it off.
Yeah. So I do like all that. And then we have Diddy and the first timeline appearance of Dixie Kong coming up on like the abduction site. And then Cranky's like, look, a note. And it's the same letter that K. Rool has for them on the Gangplank Galleon in Pirate Panic in the captain's quarters.
So here's a weird thing about this, and it leads to something that's kind of a thing that's always like kind of bothered me a bit in the Donkey Kong Country GBA games. just first off, so the original, like, in-game letter that was in the SNES Donkey Kong Country 2 was a little bit different. It was much shorter.
Yeah.
I think it was something like, I've kidnapped that lumbering fool Donkey Kong and you'll never see him again.
Right.
Here it's, ha-ar, we have got the big monkey. If you want him back, you scurvy dogs, you'll have to hand over the banana horde. And the thing that's weird to me about this is, so this text is, instead of being taken from in-game Donkey Kong Country 2, it's taken from the manual.
Yeah.
But reworded a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll just read how the manual wrote it. To the yellow-bellied, land-lubbing Kong family. Ha-ar! We got the big monkey! If you want him back, you scurvy dogs, you'll have to hand over the banana horde. And this is what I'm getting into. Like, you notice the difference between we have got the big monkey and we got the big monkey?
Yeah.
There's a lot of weird wording choices and it's inconsistent in the GBA games. Like, they're like averse to contractions and like grammatically incorrect but natural speech sometimes.
Yeah, it is a bit weird. Yeah, there is something almost clunky about a lot of it, and I don't know if I honestly don't know. I don't know why that is. I don't know why, especially a series that's known for the very verbose characters and dialogue, why it feels so stilted here. I thought you were going to complain about the fact that it's clear that it's just a typeface on this parchment and that he didn't actually handwrite this. He used some sort of typewriter with white ink.
He is a pirate with an airship. I wouldn't doubt that he's also a pirate with a printing press.
So here's a little something I just realized in the last week. This parchment, it's not quite the same. The edges are different, but it's effectively the same texture used for the pages in Saberwolf GBA for the like creatures. Their little entries in the Good Creatures and Bad Creatures books. It's effectively this same texture, but they did have different edges on each one, but it's still like a torn, tattered piece of parchment that inexplicably has like modern fonts on there. But yeah, you can clearly see they just reused the same like paper effect.
Yeah,
so
K-Rool's got to make sure you can read it on a tiny GBA screen. He can't get too creative with his with his calligraphy.
Right, and he probably has terrible handwriting too. As somebody who just had to fill out over 100 holiday cards, and I have terrible handwriting, and I feel very self-conscious about it, especially when I get on like card 60 and I'm starting to get a little sloppy, and I'm just like, warmest wishes, but I don't know. Like, I'm afraid that it's just going to be illegible and people are going to think it's some sort of like death threat being mailed to them. If I could just type it out, I would. So I empathize with K-Rool here.
Yeah, the alternate beginning of DKC2 where Donkey Kong is kidnapped and nobody can read the ransom note so they don't know where he went.
Yeah, it's going to make for a wonderful episode of DKU What If in a few years. So at that point, we then cut to the extended Kong family on the Congo beach. And we've got, joining Diddy, Dixie, and Cranky, Wrinkly, Swanky, and Funky. It's a bit weird that Candy's not there because they do find a role for Candy later on. But yeah, sure, why not? I mean, this is, again, replicating the Donkey Kong Country 2 manual, although I don't think Swanky factored into that at all.
Yeah, and this is another consequence of them just being locked into these sprites. They are kind of just doing their stock animation loops, so it's a little weird to have them all fretting over Donkey Kong's capture while, like, Swanky's doing his, like, TV presenter pose, like, mugging to the camera, and Diddy is juggling constantly during this cutscene.
Dixie is chewing bubble gum and she looks pissed. And yeah, Wrinkly is just...
I guess we all deal with stress in our own ways.
Yeah, like some of us bite our fingernails. Some of us pace back and forth. Wrinkly Kong reads from a textbook. It's fine. They all deal... Like, Cranky is the only one who looks like he's remotely concerned with what's happening. Because he just looks like he's angry and lashing out at the world. I do like that Wrinkly's first line of dialogue then, as seen in games in the timeline proper, is, "I thought we'd seen the last of that old rascal." Like, this is the guy who just abducted the person you raised as a son, Wrinkly. And the most, like, fire and fury you can emanate is, "I thought we'd seen the last of that old rascal." No.
Keep in mind, she like is implied to have known him as a child because he didn't turn in his homework.
Oh, that's true. See, I always thought he was just taking like night classes to like better his education. He wanted to.
I guess that's also the way it could be read. Either way, I think is funny. Either either the megalomaniacal villain of your game is going to this kindly old school marm to learn basic math, or he was just a rotten kid.
He's got to build the Blastomatic in a couple years with Snide. He's got to know some arithmetic to get, work those complex equations out. There's a little bit of additional lore that wasn't present in the instruction manual for the original game, because Funky is just like, okay, we'll all go and help rescue Donkey Kong. Like, this is the first time we see Funky, like, kind of stepping up a little bit and not just being a shiftless slack ass where he's like, "No, adventure's not for me, bro. I just want to,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember the manual story in the SNES version just said, like, "Count me out, dudes. I hate adventures."
Yeah, but I guess because Funky just took some mushrooms like an hour before this, he says, "Wait till tomorrow and we will all go." Not we'll all go, we will all go, because Funky speaks the King's English, damn it. But then, like, Diddy is adamant. He's like, "No, we must go now. Ingard will take us." Which is interesting, because, I'd always just assumed, based on the way Donkey Kong Country 2 presented it, that for whatever reason the Gangplank Galleon was docked on Donkey Kong Island and they like sailed over to Crocodile Isle on it. And maybe that was just my own headcanon, my own reading of things because of the way the games were presented to us at the time. Donkey Kong Country ends on the Gangplank Galleon. The Gangplank Galleon is there in Donkey Kong Land. And then in Donkey Kong Country 2, the Gangplank Galleon back at Crocodile Isle. So I just thought, oh, the Gangplank Galleon has been docked there for a year. And now the Kremlings are sailing it back and Diddy and Dixie are hitching a ride. But here it says Ingard will take us. So, if you really wanted to, you could still say, well, Ingard took them to the Gangplank Galleon. But you could also say Ingard took them across the sea to Crocodile Isle. And then they boarded the Gangplank Galleon, the first thing they came to. But I do like that little flourish where it's like, yeah, we have this fish friend who we ride on all the time. Why wouldn't he just help ferry us?
And I guess that also works with, like, in the context of you don't have access to Funky right away. All of these Kongs have established architecture set up on Crocodile Isle before you get there.
Yeah.
Funky's probably the one taking them back and forth.
Right.
Between islands. But if Diddy and Dixie are impatient, then they find their own way.
Right. If Funky can't legally drive for another 24 hours, then yeah, we'll just take the fish. Thanks, Funky. Yeah, I mean, of course, this is more like a general Donkey Kong Country 2, like little fact. But all these Kongs have businesses or like side hustles on Crocodile Isle already. Like Cranky runs the Monkey Museum, which I always took to be some sort of like Kong outreach to the Kremlins. Like, okay, you're getting fed this propaganda, but here's the real history, my friends. And then
Yeah,
course,
have you considered your comrade's head mounted on the wall over here?
Right. Well, just look at the Killer Instinct machine. Look over here. Ooh. There's a dinosaur man in there. Kind of looks like one of you. Wrinkly, is teaching at Kong College, which is just like Teachers Without Borders, like coming over and, educating Kremlin kids. Swanky, his TV gig is filming on Crocodile Isle for whatever reason, the Bonus Bonanza Studios. And then, of course, Funky has just opened Funky's Flights 2, the expansion of his airplane empire to Crocodile Isle. So, I do really like this story. This is something I am very appreciative of. Okay, I'll take that back. I like the intro story. I do not like what this game did later on with its storytelling prowess. But we'll save that. We'll save that for later. You mentioned how this game would have possibly been the first introduction to Donkey Kong Country 2 for the generation who got into Donkey Kong 64 first. And I really do feel like these remakes do feel like they carry forward with the spirit of Donkey Kong 64, or they imprint the story, the tone of Donkey Kong 64 onto the story of these three games. Because everything from sound effects to little animations, it does feel a little sillier. It does feel a little bit more cartoony and broad. And, we get these segues, these wipes of Diddy's head, doing a star wipe every time you exit.
With an audio cue, like in Banjo-Kazooie.
Yeah.
In DK64.
Again, if this replaced the original version of Donkey Kong Country 2 and we never got the original version of Donkey Kong Country 2, I would have a problem with it. As it stands, it's fine because the tone is already kind of ruined because of the lightning of the backgrounds. So, it's just one of those things where this was probably going to be how Rare's Donkey Kong felt going forward, even if the buyout hadn't occurred. You look at things like the Donkey Kong Racing trailer or Diddy Kong Pilot, and the evidence is there already that this was going to be the tone, at least for a while. And, I don't like it for Donkey Kong Country, but at the same time, it's interesting. It's interesting to see them kind of try to create this hybridization between the two styles, their two Donkey Kong styles, and try to find a middle ground.
I feel like where it stands out the most for me is in the sound design, because pretty much every sound effect in the game, at least most of them, are find and replaced with primarily, I think, DK64 sound effects. As you said, they kind of pull from all over the place. There's a death grunt that's like Crunch from Diddy Kong Racing for some reason. I feel like they are by and large a lot wackier than the original ones, but the main things that kind of bother me about them are a lot of them are very high pitched. And this whole game sounds very tinny compared to the original. And I mean, again, you're working with the GBA. There's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
But another one, and I understand the choice behind this. Diddy and Dixie have a lot more voiced audio, and With DK and Diddy in the last game, you just had to pull their clips from DK64 because they were both in DK64. Dixie is reusing Tiny Kong's voice.
Yeah.
And it's pretty distracting, and I kind of feel look, I know that a female Rare character was only ever going to be one of 3 actors, but even if she was even slightly different than Tiny, it would be less distracting.
It is distracting once you realize where they pulled it from, and they're sisters, so sure, but it. I do wish they could have used a different source for Dixie, because yeah, that's Tiny. That's clearly Tiny Kong. It is like cool to hear Chris Sutherland's Diddy, because this was around the time he was going to start being phased out, in like Diddy's new appearances. So
it's weirdly kind of a natural fit here, I think, of anything they meddled with.
Yeah, it weirdly is, because Chris Sutherland didn't start voicing Diddy until Diddy Kong Racing, and of course Donkey Kong 64 then, but even taking it backwards in time and applying it to Donkey Kong Country 2, it kind of works. It's maybe we're just more familiar with it, and it doesn't feel as wrong. Like Grant Kirkhope as Donkey Kong, it's just like, yeah, that's Donkey Kong. That's what you established, so can't really find fault with that. So I mentioned like sprite work. So of course with these games, they're not ports. They had to effectively recreate Donkey Kong Country 2 using like pillaged assets, right? Like they Frankenstein these games together. Like the character sprites were they taken from like ROMs?
If I remember right from the interview hosted on DK Vine, it was a matter of like they tried to salvage what they could of the assets from the original game's development. The problem was Rare's archiving was not stellar back then. A lot of the assets were stored on old floppy disks, and thing about magnetic storage is it is not very reliable. So a lot of stuff was just totally lost to them, but I think they found some stuff digging around in there, like some like additional animation frames I think might have come from that. And digging around in the ROMs and using emulators like help them clean up the rest of what they needed.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
At least that's the impression I got.
Yeah.
Of course, there are like totally bespoke things in this game as well.
Yes. So, like with Donkey Kong Country GBA, they redid the map screens entirely, because if you'll remember, the first two Donkey Kong Country games just used static images, static rendered scenes for the map screens. With Donkey Kong Country 3, they kind of actually added some animations and flourishes because the map screens were more interactive. You explored, you had to look for the banana bird caves, and there was just more to do, which necessitated a little bit more effort being put into the map screens. And so we get these new reimaginings of the map screens of all of the worlds and the overworld for Donkey Kong Country 2. And, like, as much as I adore the way Crocodile Isle looks in the original and the worlds look, as much as that's iconic in my mind and will always be like what I think of first, I don't hate the way these worlds look. I actually like a lot of these map screens. Some of them that are like more or less faithful to the way the Super Nintendo version laid it out, I really like, because it's like we're seeing different vantage points. And then the others that completely reimagine them, I'm a little iffier on. But overall, I think they look lovely. And it's got that great like look of these Rare games from this team, like on the GBA of this era. I love the way these games look. Like there's a very like smooth vibrancy to these like map screens that wasn't present in the first two games on the Super Nintendo.
I think these map screens are like my single favorite original contribution that this remake made. Because as you said, it's kind of cool to see these old environments recontextualized in like like from a completely different angle with different staging. And there's a few flourishes we don't even really get in the original. Like they make a point to like every Kong building as well as Clubba's kiosk is entirely visible and like placed in a real space.
Yeah.
But also, I feel like these map screens are like part of why I like don't judge the handheld team too harshly for the way that the rest of the game looks, because between this and Saberwolf GBA and Grunty's Revenge, I feel like whenever the handheld team had to create original 3D assets and pre-render them for the Game Boy Advance, I feel like they tended to come out really, really well.
Oh yeah.
Like they don't look 100% like the Super Nintendo sprites because you don't downsample things in the same way you did back then. But
yeah.
And I think they also solve the color saturation problem because they're specifically like designed to have a lower contrast. So they don't look blown out. They just look like this is the way they're supposed to look.
Yeah. It does remind me of Saberwolf GBA and the environments in that game, which I just replayed a little bit last weekend. And like I wasn't even doing it to prep for this episode, but it's just interesting to see all these like comparisons and contrast with that game. And yeah, like this team could do spectacular work on the GBA, just like, you know, rare of any era. They really push the hardware. It's just translating those original levels to the GBA was kind of a no-win situation. And they eventually, I feel like, found the right balance finally with DKC3. But you look at these map screens and you're like, yeah, like if they could just do original levels for Donkey Kong, I think it would have been spectacular.
Agreed.
One thing I really like is, now you mentioned the Kong buildings, and we'll talk about that when we talk about each individual Kong, because that's where the bulk of new stuff actually comes from. But in particular, the Gangplank Galleon map screen, it's effectively like the camera is reversed from where it was in a Super Nintendo. So we're seeing the Gangplank Galleon actually against Crocodile Isle instead of with Donkey Kong Island in the background. And so you finally get an understanding of where the Kongs were in relation to the ship. And so it's like, no, Swanky doesn't have a TV studio on this pirate ship. You're actually reaching it from like the outskirts, the rocks on the coast of Crocodile Isle. It just looks like you're on the pirate ship still because of the camera angle. Little stuff like that I really, really appreciate. And yeah, it's just lovely to look at. I remember when this game came out, someone on the DK Vine forum, either someone on the DK Vine forum or somewhere else, and then it was brought to the DK Vine forum, but they ripped all of these map screens as best they could from the GBA version. You like couldn't have all the assets in there, like the water from the Gangplank Galleon, but just poring over them and like studying all the details and marveling at how they look. That was like a big forum topic back in 2004, was the new map screens. And so it was definitely a crowd pleaser back then. I do think some of them get a little bit askew from how I would have liked. Like, I get what they were going for, but for example, K-Rool's Keep, they structure it to look like a dollhouse where you've got like the cutaway where like you see the interior without the wall. So it has like the like fold out dollhouse kind of look to it, which I don't know if that really works well.
It's a little odd, and I guess a thing to keep in mind about all of these map screens is they take a different tack from the Super Nintendo version. This is true of every GBA Donkey Kong Country. Rather than having a static map screen that you like move your character around, these are very large-scale maps that scroll with the screen, and you have a very zoomed-in view of them at any given time.
Yes.
So with that in mind, I can maybe understand why they did this.
Mm.
I also do appreciate, even though the presentation is kind of weird, that the Crocodile Isle, the K. Rules Keep map also reflects the non-castle archetypes that are in it, and even like tries to adjust for the rearranged level order.
Yeah.
Because we see that a lot of this castle is like caked in ice.
Right. Yeah. The most faithful one, weirdly, is the Flying Croc, and I guess that's just because there is really no need to reinvent the wheel on that one, because it's just, you go through the brambles, and then you're on the Flying Croc.
I do think the visual of Brinkley having a schoolhouse right at the tip of the keep is really funny.
That's where K. Rool went to night school. That's. I mean, he was like, "Look, I'll go, but you've got."
He was homeschooled in that the school was on his home.
When you're a monarch, yeah, you can get away with that kind of shit. It's the 1% lording it over all of us. I like the way the Lost World looks too, although it does the thing that I believe Donkey Kong Land 2 does, where you go like completely around the crocodile core, and the crocodile core also isn't emanating. Like the Kremlin source isn't visible on the map screen, which I hate.
Yeah.
That's like, what is it like? Is it invisible from certain angles? Like, is it only like, is it only like seen with the naked eye from like a certain vantage point? Because yeah, like you go in the crocodile core and the Kremlin source is there. It's just like it is in the Super Nintendo version, but it never shows up on the map screen or in the game's ending. So I don't know.
Yeah. They do make a design adjustment on this map that I do appreciate, like on a game implementation level. In the original game, whenever you'd access a level in the Lost World from a normal world like Kremkey or Crazy Kremland, you'd only have access to the level you unlocked.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to the Lost World from any kiosk in the GBA game, you have access to any level you've unlocked, and you can kind of just traverse the whole circle of the map. And I think that's a good like streamlining choice.
It probably is, yeah. Like I did like how it felt like each Lost World level was technically just an extension of that game's like primary world. Like Crocodile Cauldron takes you to Jungle Japes, you know. Like I like that structure too, but I can see why that's cumbersome and kind of irritating. So it probably makes sense. A lot of these games were about streamlining design conventions from the mid-90s into the mid-aughts. So stuff like automatic saving, like you can save your game anywhere. You don't have to go to a save point because that's ridiculous.
Which is why they had to come up with new things for all the Kongs to do.
Yes. And so let's touch upon that, shall we? Because like I said, this is where most of the new features are actually implemented through the various Kong helpers and Clubba, which could be defined as a Kong helper, even though that's kind of more of an antagonistic relationship at times. But there are new bonus games from Kongs, and they find things for the Kongs who don't have bonus games to do besides just what they did in the original game. So with Cranky, of course, Cranky was in the Monkey Museum in Donkey Kong Country 2 for the Super Nintendo. And for some reason, and I'm not sure why, they rebranded the Monkey Museum as Cranky's Hut in this game. Maybe because they took away a lot of the museum elements, like the visual components of it. But even then, there's still some stuff.
At first, I wondered if it's like, they reused like the hut exterior from the first game, it seems like, to make the model for his exterior, so maybe that's why they did it, but no, on all these map screens, you see the word museum hanging over his doorframe.
yeah. So they did the effort of like putting museum on there, but then they changed the name to Cranky's Hut. It's still the Monkey Museum in my heart. You know, you can call it,
Yeah.
it is a Cranky's Hut, but it's also a monkey museum.
Yeah, that said, the inside is very much re-centered around the fact that Cranky is now host to Espresso's Racing.
Yes. Can I just point out really quick, though, about Cranky's Hut? You mentioned how they reused Cranky's cabin from the first game. And it's interesting that they did that because then in Donkey Kong Country Returns, they used the same design for Cranky's shop. So it just says to me that Cranky Kong, as outside of his laboratories, really just likes the same architectural design for all of his domiciles. He's like, no, gotta be a barrel with a tin roof.
Yeah.
Just go with
Not
that.
going to be like Donkey Kong and have like 3 different ones that all look entirely distinct.
Right. Cranky knows what he likes. He's set in his ways. And he's like, look, I need you to build 7 museums for me on Crocodile Isle. Here's what they're going to look like. Yeah, they're all the same. Yeah. It's just my cabin. So the interior, like there's no Killer Instinct machine. There's no severed head of a Cruncha. There's really nothing interesting to look at all, except Winky. You know, in the first game, again, static background. So you had Winky in the terrarium, and there was this debate in the fandom. Is that really Winky? Is that just this kind of statue representation of Winky, or is Winky taxidermied? And is Winky dead? That was Daly's theory that I've argued with several times in my life. Like, no, Winky's not dead.
Yeah, because he was posed mid-jump instead of just like standing there. If he was just like standing in the background, you could have just said, well, maybe he's just being very still and not blinking. But no, it was in midair.
So in the GBA version, I'm getting tired of saying DKC2 GBA. So I got called out in the YouTube comments on a conversation the other week because I always like to say like the full game name. I don't use abbreviations. I'm like Donkey Kong Country 2, Donkey Kong Country 3, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. And somebody asked me, why do you do that?
The Spotlight Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing with Banjo-Kazooie episode is going to be 5 hours long.
I like doing that because I like saying the name of these games. They feel like velvety chocolate on my tongue. It's just like yum yum. So they added a moving Winky at long last. However, it's not quite Winky, or it's not quite Winky's model, because like in DKC GBA and in this game, there's an abundance of wildlife, just ambient wildlife that they've added to the backgrounds of the levels. For example, on the Gangplank Galleon, on the ship deck stages, they added ship rats, which is weird because we already have Neeks as the ship rats of the Gangplank Galleon. So there's also just regular rats on there in addition to Neeks. Okay. But there's little frogs and, Saberwolf also has an abundance of wildlife on both the map screen, the overworld, and in the stages as well. So this team really just like showing off, like filling the environments with just docile animal life, which I do appreciate. I love that. But they reused one of the frogs as a stand-in for Winky, and it's just Winky's model shrunk down, so it's fine. But you're like, well, why is
you can
Winky...
see the way it moves, and it's a very distinctly like that's Winky's like jumping gait.
So you're like, well, why is Winky so small? And you're like, you're really complaining about the scale of characters in a rare game? Like, I mean,
look, it was cold, okay?
The fact is, Espresso is also there. As you said, Espresso's Racing is the big bonus game added for Cranky's Hut in this game, and it finally gives a role for Espresso, because Espresso really was shut out completely from the original DKC2, because Winky at least was referenced in the background, and there was the Espresso token in the original vision of the Monkey Museum, but Espresso did not appear in the flesh at all in DKC2.
Even you had the joke in the manual about how Cranky's favorite animal buddies were Espresso and Winky, just so he could complain about them not being in the game.
And that joke carried over into the Donkey Kong 64 manual as well. He was still going on about poor Winky and Espresso.
Though we do have a little continuity hiccup here in that, when you're introduced to this mode, Cranky treats the ostrich behind him as like a newly acquired pet to race and says, we'll name him Espresso.
Yes. And I know some people, especially because you start off and Espresso's tiny, and then you like give him the gold feathers and he just grows into regular Espresso size. So some people argue this is a second Espresso. This is Espresso 2 or Espresso Junior. I don't like that so much. Like, I like, this is just Espresso. Why does Cranky treat it like a new bird? I mean, it's one of those things you said, Cameron, you just kind of have to squint sometimes with these remakes.
Yeah.
Because there's curious
it's
choices.
It's hard to dispute, like, this is meant to be Espresso.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, like, we see later on, right, that Cranky has a habit of acquiring animal buddies. Like in the retro era, he's got Squawks in his possession, and he just starts, like, renting out Squawks. And, like, what gives you the right, Cranky? Like, Squawks has just been our parrot companion for years now. Why are you all of a sudden charging us to, like, take him out? So this is just kind of that, like, Cranky's like, oh, I've purchased this bird. Like, no, you didn't. You just put Espresso in a cage. You monster.
I kind of like this facet of Cranky's character that's sort of emerged, though, where he becomes caretaker of your animal buddies who are sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah. I mean, even going back to the first original version of this game, you could say he did that with Winky. So it just makes sense then to also have him bring an Espresso, because again, it's established these are his favorite animal buddies, even if it was just out of spite or something to complain about. I do like that Espresso and Winky are both with Cranky in this game, even though Winky doesn't do anything. But Espresso really, I mean, this whole era was like the Espresso Sans, right? Like, it was Espresso's renewal, albeit however brief, because he got Espresso's Racing, he got that cameo on Banjo Pilot, and that's it. But oh my god, what a year he had. what a few months that was for Espresso. And I like how it's initially in the menu, it's called Cranky Surprise. It's not even labeled as Espresso's Racing. It's labeled as Cranky Surprise. And you're like, what's Cranky Surprise gonna be? And it's just like, oh, you see this caged bird behind me? Yeah, you're gonna race him in these underground Kremlin ostrich races. It's like, okay. He doesn't actually say that. That's just my little flourish. But Espresso's Racing. Now, Dustin and I just talked quite a bit about Espresso earlier this season, and we got into all of the various ostrich rivals that Espresso races throughout the various Espresso's Racing races, because there is a race in the Gangplank Galleon, Crocodile Cauldron, Kremke, Crazy Kremland, Gloomy Gulch, Carol's Keep, and the Lost World. Not in the Flying Croc, because there's no Cranky stationed in the Flying Croc. So there are rare, gotta love them. They named each ostrich rival to Espresso, and there is a different one in each world, in each race. Now, each race just uses the jungle archetype from the Lost World as the background, but they changed the color, they changed environmental effects to kind of make it work for that world.
As someone who used to manage the back end of the DK Vine artwork gallery, I am intimately familiar with all of these ostriches, thanks to Matt Corna providing artwork for all of them. Tweaking the renders of Espresso in these different colors and individually naming all of them.
Yeah, so in our character database, we've got 7 different names for the red ostrich render, 7 different names for the green ostrich render, and 7 different names for the blue ostrich render, which is just Matt changing the color grading on each Espresso render. But yeah, I've got to say them. I was going to be I don't need to say them because we went over this on the character witness for Espresso, but it's the Donkey Kong Country 2 Game Boy Advance Spotlight episode, Cameron. And these are the breakout characters. Everybody else says Kerosine, but I say the breakout characters are Smokey, Chewy, Rapido, Sneakers, Beardy, Zippy, Loopy, Tinky, Bungle, Tremors, Monsoon, Mima, Papa Laws, Humpty, Rippa, Flicky, Aftershock, Ozzy, Bazzy, Misty, and Minogue, who we had confirmed is named after Kylie.
It's very funny to me how many of these names are it's clearly a split between these are just expected pet names or names of a fast animal, and then blatantly just in-jokes.
In-joke. Beardy is back as an in-joke. Of course, most famously seen in Conker's Bad Fur Day, when Conker thought Birdie's name was Beardy. There's in-jokes we probably will never know the meaning of.
Yeah. I'm just going to point out right now, I Googled Papa Laws trying to figure out what the heck is that, and the first result is Papa Lazaro from the League of Gentlemen. On the BBC.
Okay.
So that was probably it.
Yeah, probably. It was probably just different people on the team. It's yeah, you want to name one of these birds? We need to come up with names for all these birds. But this is what I appreciate, because I just got done discussing Donkey Kong 64 with Courtney. And, one of my criticisms of Donkey Kong 64, due to the very rushed nature of trying to get it done for the holiday release window, was there was a bit of sloppiness that you didn't expect from Rare, where they didn't name a lot of the characters. A lot of the NPCs were just nameless weirdos. And that was so atypical of Rare, who always took the time to give the slightest bit of shine to even the most minute nothing character, which is, one of the reasons it trained the fans of their games to obsess over the character above all else, because it's one part Greg Malesian game design, another part that attention to detail from the various, writers at Rare, like Lee Loveday. They just went out of their way to make sure everybody had an identity. It's that Star Wars expanded universe / action figure mentality, where it's even the most nothing background character can have a whole story behind them. And Donkey Kong 64 is an anomaly, because here we are, Donkey Kong Country 2 for the Game Boy Advance. We have 21 new racing ostriches, and they all have different names. That is classic Rare. So with Espresso's Racing, by the way, I want to point out the race names. Each one has a different race name depending on the world. So we have Ship Deck Dash for the Gangplank Galleon, Magma Spurt for the Crocodile Cauldron, Swampy Swoop for Creme Key, Fairground Fall for Crazy Creme Land, Spooky Sprint for Gloomy Gulch, Creepy Castle for K-Roll's Keep, which, really? Lost World Leap for, I don't know what that one's for.
All but one of those passes for a Donkey Kong Country level name. Even Creepy Castle.
Yeah. Magma Spurt. Yeah, I don't know what was going on there. Like, Magma Massacre, I don't know. Like, that doesn't really have anything to do with racing, but neither does Creepy Castle. So
Scalding Spurt? I don't know.
Yeah, I whatever. So Golden Feathers. So with these a lot of these bonus games or new features for the Kongs, because not all the bonus games utilize this, but other Kong helpers will bring some of this into the levels. There is an entirely new collectible to be found within the levels of Donkey Kong Country 2. Golden Feathers. One found per level, similar to the hero coins in the original game, in that they're 40 in all. You get the first one from Cranky, and then you get the other 39 from the levels. Now, getting all 40 will max out Espresso stats, which are strength, speed, flight, and boost. So you can choose which order you upgrade those stats, but you can max them all out by the end. So if you collect all the Golden Feathers, your Espresso will be basically just like a beast, and he won't be like bespoke to how you tailored him. He'll just be completely maxed out. Now, the Golden Feathers, they are golden ostrich feathers. They are not golden Reigle feathers, for those who are wondering. Although you could make the argument, as I have done, that perhaps whatever enchantment turns those Reigle feathers golden was also done to these ostrich feathers, because it, same universe, why not? But I didn't mind the golden feathers being added to the levels. I think one of the criticisms of this is you're just adding more stuff, and you're kind of messing with these like perfected balance of the like hidden objects in the original game. But I was fine with it. It's just kind of a little bonus for those who are coming back for a second round with this game, and you've got new stuff to do. So as much as it does feel like they're just throwing stuff in there, like the same problem that Rare was criticized for in the past, just bloat, like collectible bloat, I didn't really have a problem with this. I kind of like that it was there.
Something I kind of like about these also is that they for the most part seem to be hidden largely by way of repurposing like little tiny bonus areas that were already in the original game, like just side paths that would get you more bananas or have a coin or just be like a dead end. So like it's an exciting new thing to collect in this version, but if you're playing the original, it doesn't feel like there's this giant thing missing.
Yeah.
Either.
Yeah. I think it was tastefully done as far as messing with what a lot of us consider to be the perfected Donkey Kong Country experience with the second game. So, I don't think this broke it. I don't really have any criticisms with the new collectibles. The only criticism I have about the collectibles will come later with what they did to a returning collectible. I'll table that for now. Cranky also, like in the original GBA remake, provides commentary after the boss battles. He strolls in and he says, "Wow, you sure killed that bird," or something thereabouts. Which, oh yeah, by the way, you do see Crow's ghost.
Wow, you have sure killed that bird.
Wow, you'll never be able to wash the blood off of those hands. We do see Crow's spirit leave his body at the end of the fight in the Gangplank Galleon.
It's a cute touch, though he does still twitch afterward.
Yeah, that's just his nervous system. Yeah. Like, he's still... like, it just like when you cut the head off a snake, it still twitches.
This is us just seeing Crow void his bowels on screen.
But I do like that confirmation, because some people, like up until that point, argued that, well, Creepy Crow's a different character. It's like, no, he's Crow's ghost. That is what it's supposed to be. So they make it very blatant here. You just killed Crow. You just broke poor Crow's neck. You were trying to knock him out with his egg. I understand. But guess what? Violence has consequences. It's something you'll learn at the end of the game, Diddy and Dixie. So, Espresso Racing is kind of what is often talked about when we talk about the new features of this game, because it's a memorable use of an old character who was left out of the first version. Funky also has a completely new bonus game attached to Funky's Flights 2. He had Funky's Fishing in the GBA game, and, you know, the version of it was in the Game Boy Color iteration as well. Funky's bonus game in this one is called Funky's Flights. His actual shop is Funky's Flights 2. The bonus game is just Funky's Flights. You got that? Not confusing at all. This was the era of the Super Mario Advance games, so this shouldn't be confusing. But this is what's different with Funky this go around. So Funky does not have the same plane in this version. By the way, Funky's Flights 2 looks basically the same as it did on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah,
it's a new model.
It stands out to me because Funky's operation was in one of the more abstract backgrounds in the original. Because it does seem to be like just a contextless flying surfboard runway with like a cabana and his old jet barrel like sitting in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have thought with how heavily they've modified Funky's role in this game, they could have like totally gone with something completely different, similar to how in Donkey Kong Country GBA it was very much like restructured around it being the hub for Funky Fishing.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's still surreal and weird, and has the jumbo jet in the background still.
It does still have the jumbo jet. It has his beach ball. His beach ball is still there. What's interesting to me is, so yeah, you said it was abstract in the Super Nintendo version, and it was also zoomed in just a little bit, so you didn't necessarily, unless you really paid attention and figured it out, walk away like realizing it was a floating surfboard. Like his airport is literally a floating surfboard, a hover surfboard. Now, Funky also is on a hover surfboard. So, like, I should have put the pieces together. I did not figure that out until it might have been this game. It might have been the GBA version because it's zoomed out just enough. It's a new model for it, but they recreated it pretty faithfully. And
yeah,
I was like, it's a floating surfboard. Did they change that? I went back and looked at this SNES version. No, it was a floating surfboard there. What really like sells it though is you see it on the map screen. So it's like weird. That is weird. And that's like one of the biggest flights of fancy that the like original version of the game does. Like that's the kind of silliness you would expect from the GBA remakes, but no, that was there from the start. So yeah, like I said, Funky does not have the same plane this time around. He uses what I call the prototype of the gyrocopter from Donkey Kong Country 3. Of course, the gyrocopter was like the big ticket vehicle.
On the one hand, the biplane barrel is so distinct to this game that I miss having it around. It feels weird without it.
Uh-huh.
On the other hand, I do like the pave over that when you first talk to him, he says like, oh, my flights are all booked up. So presumably he's still using that barrel and just you're being lent the gyrocopter because he doesn't have anything else.
Right. And like, this is a slightly different gyrocopter from the ultimate unlockable vehicle in DKC 3. This is like yellow and it doesn't necessarily look like it's built out of a barrel like everything else.
Yeah.
So I call this the prototype gyrocopter. This is what he was working on and didn't perfect until a year after this when he finally finished it when he got all of the DK/hero coins from Dixie. But yeah, the gyrocopter, because I guess you're testing it out for him, you've got to do the first mission before he lets you use it as like his like makeshift like or make do plane rental. So each world that has a Funky's Flights 2 has one of these missions, and these are all original mini games. And you can really see the team stretching their muscles here, because you would get a lot more of this in DKC 3 a year later. But yeah, here they're really like playing with like what kind of like classic like video game concepts can we do with this gyrocopter, like flying Diddy and Dixie around. What they repurpose level archetypes for this, but they're new environments entirely, and each one has a different objective and a different time limit. And Funky always says, you only have like 3 minutes of fuel. It's like, why didn't you fill it up further then to 5 minutes of fuel like you did last time? So the first mission is called Aerial Loop, and it takes you into the brambles, weirdly enough. Like, they're not consistent. Like, the archetypes don't match the world necessarily, which is a bit weird. But yeah, you go into the brambles for Aerial Loop in the Gangplank Galleon, and the objective is you're just testing out the gyrocopter. So fly through 20 rings of stars through this bramble maze, but don't hit the brambles or else you're gonna get blown up. The gyrocopter will explode on you. There's also spiders in this level, like original spider baddies that shoot webs at you.
Yeah, they look kind of like Nid, but not quite.
Yeah.
It's weird.
In my show notes, I wrote some type of Nid, because that's, I mean, my theory is I guess they're a type of Nid, but it is weird. Why didn't they just pull in Nids? They pulled in other stuff from later Donkey Kong games, so why not Nid? So I do want to read Funky's dialogue setting up each mission, because some of these are quite funny or amusing, or there's important lore there. So Funky says, this is a piece of cake. All you have to do is take off and fly through 20 rings. You can pass through each ring in any direction. Slowly land at the helipad to complete the mission. You have 5 minutes of fuel. Good luck. So that's not really that interesting. The other ones are more interesting. But then once you complete it, he says, awesome, guys. You know, this was technically 1995, so he freely used guys, even in reference to Dixie. He wasn't, forward thinking. I'm sure the Funky of 2024 wouldn't use such a gendered term. But Funky says, you sure got the hang of flying. You are now free to use the copter whenever you need it. And then he explains how to use it. And he says, one more thing. I could use a good pilot. Come back to see me. I have plenty of jobs on the go. So it does. I do like the little story explanations they have to come up with. The very contrived story explanations for each mission Funky has you go on. That's kind of one of the more interesting bits of this game, because they had to get creative, and a lot of times they got quite stupid with it.
Yeah, and you do also kind of have to ignore the wacky sense of scale in these, because you're controlling a very tiny Dixie or Diddy Kong. Yeah.
Again, you can't complain about scale in a Rare game, because it's very fluid. It's like Banjo and Kazooie are not that small. The other characters are not that big. K. Rool is not the same size as Diddy in Donkey Kong Land, not literally. Nor is he a giant in Donkey Kong 64. It's all just like, yeah.
Like, look, we couldn't redraw every asset in the proper scale.
Yeah.
You gotta accept it.
Yeah, they're slightly in the background, you see. It's forced perspective. So, Crocodile Cauldron, there is a mission called Submerged Stint. And this is how Funky explains it. I'm going to try to do a Funky voice just to give a little color to this. Whoa, dude, you back again? No, I'm not going to do that. I have just the job for you, but you must learn to fly using advanced controls. Pressing the R button will lock your facing direction, allowing you to shoot while moving backwards. Pressing the L button, I guess the gyrocopter has an R button and an L button, will make the copter face forward, useful in tight situations. One thing though, while in this mode, you can only drop bombs. Oh yeah, the gyrocopter comes equipped with bombs, which is going to be very important later. I need you to take a chest to the second landing zone. There is one problem. The way ahead is flooded. The gyrocopter can only hold so much air, which is weird. Because it's like, it seems to be...
It's an open cockpit
yes.
flying machine.
Yeah, a bit weird, but okay. I assume there's maybe a breathing tube in there or something. I don't know how that protects against the bends, but okay, sure. So keep a close eye on the gauge in the bottom right corner of the screen. Press select to release the winch. It will automatically hook onto the chest. Press select again to retract the winch. One more thing. You'll need to pick up some ammo packs and blast your way through any blockages. This is a long haul mission. I filled her up to the max. You have 10 minutes of flying time. Flying, by the way, no G at the end of that, just an apostrophe. So they don't have to use proper English all the time.
Yeah, it's not consistent.
No.
The lack of consistency makes it even more questionable.
Don't waste it. So I guess Funky just wanted some fucking treasure, and he was just like, yeah, there's a treasure chest. Could you get this treasure chest? I mean,
also, I guess this is like the start of him going down his ordnance rabbit hole in Donkey Kong 64.
He just has an interest in munitions as an inventor. He's not a literal gun nut. He just likes the craftsmanship behind it, okay?
Anyway, here's how you use the bombs on my helicopter.
Okay, but then that taught him how to make orange grenades, okay? So there is a method to his evolution here. And also, he wanted this treasure chest because he already had his boat shop in mind in the Northern Hemisphere. He's like, if I get this treasure chest, I mean, I'm here on a pirate island. If I could snag some treasure along the way, I could open this expansion in the Northern Hemisphere. For such a laid-back, empathetic dude, he sure is a shrewd businessman. You don't usually see the mix of the two.
He's a very laid-back, shrewd businessman.
He is the kind of billionaire we all wish actually existed, but in practical terms, never actually could. Funky is a fictional character. We have to keep that in mind. As much as we would all like to believe, if there's actually a Funky Kong out there, if somebody comes along and you say, oh, hey, that guy, he's the real life Funky Kong. I guess like Richard Branson would be the closest. And even that's not a great analogy, but like, don't get fooled if a billionaire comes along with like sunglasses and a mechanic's garb and you're like, finally a real life Funky Kong. Let's believe in this guy, because give it a decade and he'll buy a social media platform to influence elections. It's not going to be great.
Yeah, he's going to call it Cackle.
I swear you have these loaded up in your chamber, but no, you're just that quick-witted. Pisses me off. So Kremke has, I think, the first real weird one. It's called Kongstruction. And apparently the Kremlins, because the Kremlins are going back and forth to Donkey Kong Island during this time, while most of the Kongs are on Crocodile Isle. What they're up to, they're up to various things, including tearing down a statue of Donkey Kong and taking the pieces to Crocodile Isle or something. Because I don't think the statue was on Crocodile Isle. Now, why was there a statue of Donkey Kong on DK Island? Maybe they built it, they erected it in honor of, getting the banana horde back. It's like, you're our future protector, Donkey Kong.
Somebody carved that island. It's a thing that they just do.
It is a thing. They do love their statues, which, bit them in the ass when they made that statue of Billy Mitchell. But they stole the pieces of a Donkey Kong statue. Would you like to read Funky's dialogue for this one, Cameron?
Sure.
Back again? This mission is quite tricky. The Kremlings have destroyed the DK statue. Find the pieces and reconstruct it. To hook a statue piece, press select to release the winch. Pressing select again will drop off anything on the rope. One more thing. Keep a close eye on any statue pieces rebuilt, as they might go missing. You have 5 minutes of fuel, so get going.
So it's interesting here because the baddies that are stealing the pieces are flitters, the dragonflies, which is a weird use for the. I like that they use them like that, but it's the most agency flitters ever have. So
yeah, I don't really think of them as being minions. They always seem like they're just kind of like wildlife that's aggressive.
Well, now you know. Now you know that they're part of the Kremlin crew too. They are just as corrupt as anyone else. Yeah.
This one's also another weird case like we had with the Brambles in Aerial Loop, where it's like a very distant preview of a later archetype in the game.
Yeah, it's K. Rool's Keep. It's his castle. Which does he have like a little fortress in Kremkey, or are you going all the way up to K. Rool's Keep? And if that's the case, why don't they just fly to the top?
Yeah, it's the DKC Returns moon problem again. Well, maybe it takes more than 10 minutes to get up there, so Funky just can't give them enough fuel to do it.
Why didn't Funky Kong just fly them to Mordor? This is similar in execution to the egg battle game in Diddy Kong Racing, because there's this like keep away element to it where you're rebuilding the statue, but then others can take what you've gotten, and so it's kind of like a race to get it complete before time runs out. Also, just so much usage of winches in this game. Is this the most winch-heavy Donkey Kong game in existence? It would have to be, right?
Yeah, for Donkey Kong, at least. Like, maybe there's tow cables in other games I'm, like, in the DKU, but for Donkey Kong, this is very specific.
Yeah. I do like this one. I remember this one being very fun. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, so these are, like, going to be very extremely varied as we go. And that's certainly the case with Crazy Kremlands. Monumental.
I'm just looking
mission.
in the screenshot in these show notes and realizing just how much work you have cut out for you here.
Oh, this is fine. This one is called Kong Napped. And basically, well, let me read Funky's description first, and then I will read my explanation of it. Come on, dudes. I need your help. Zingers have attacked Kong Island and kidnapped members of the Kong family. Go and rescue them. To pick up a passenger, land beside them and they will jump right in. Once they're on board, take them back to the helipad. You must rescue 6 hostages to complete this mission. She's all gassed up and ready to go. You have 5 minutes flying time. So you're like, what other Kong members are on DK Island that the Zingers are like picking up? First of all, what a terrifying prospect, right? You're going about your day and all of a sudden a giant bee hornet hybrid.
Abducted by giant bees.
My God, my log. Yeah, it's Like, it's one thing to be attacked by sword-wielding Kremlings and getting
That
tied
might
up.
actually be a nightmare for me.
Yeah, that's the kind of dream you would have, and you would wake up from in just the most like cold, drenched sweats. So what Kongs were taken away by bees? Well, there's only one Kong that could plausibly be carried away by something as lightweight as a zinger. And that's Tiny Kong. Yes, this is the first timeline appearance of Tiny Kong. This is predating her getting aged up as a teenager, so there's no weird canon issues with that. She's very much her DK64 Tiny Kong visage, so that's fine. The problem is Funky said, you must rescue 6 hostages. And yeah, you have to rescue at least 6 hostages out of, 10? 10 in total? But they're all Tiny Kong. 10 identical Tiny Kongs. Now, I've seen this argued. Again, this is kind of like the Espresso 2 or the is that really Winky argument, where people make the argument, well, these aren't literally Tiny Kongs. These are just representative of no-name Kongs living on Donkey Kong Island.
I do imagine like the Occam's razor explanation is this is Tiny Kong standing in for generic Kongs, and they didn't think anybody would actually discern the tiny sprite well enough to notice.
Yeah. The same team that had to name every ostrich because they knew the fans would be mad thought they could get away with this. Okay, so the way I rationalize it is that's a valid explanation, or that like they abducted Kongs from Tiny's elementary school. Right, so
yeah, if you could actually see them all up close, they'd all have Tiny's hair and clothes, but they'd be like slightly off model in some other way, like a find the difference, like placemat puzzle.
Right. I also rationalized it at the time as, oh, you're rescuing Tiny, and then the zingers immediately grab Tiny again, which isn't great, which is very sloppy and very much you really have to squint to make that one work. I do think at least one of these is canonically Tiny Kong. So like I'm happy with that, you know. They probably just like really like went after her school at recess or something, and just a swarm of zingers. I'm sure like if that's the case though, they weren't allowed outside for recess for the rest of the school year. That probably would put a damper on things, I would say. But all things considered, this is less of a continuity headache than the mini games in Donkey Kong Country 3 GBA. Because there would be kind of the opposite problem there, where there would be Kongs introduced into those mini games that would create legitimate continuity errors with the game itself. Not even like future continuity errors. I'm talking about continuity errors within the logic of DKC3. So at the very least, this is one of those you could easily hand wave away if you care to. And of course, we care to. It's just, like they didn't want to create 10 original unique Kongs. So just use Tiny's model. I appreciate the Tiny's there. I like that. From a certain point of view, Tiny made her debut alongside her big sister, except in a much more, like, small, helpless way. Kind of makes her starring role in Donkey Kong 64 feel a bit more impactful and a little bit less, who the hell is this? What did you do with Dixie? It's like, okay, now it's her kid sister's time to shine. She got carried away by Zinger. She has every right to fight. Anyway, so even though that's like my favorite continuity or like lore funky mission in this game, my favorite one, however, is the one that comes in Gloomy Gulch, which is it's the dumbest and therefore the most beautiful. It's called Cool Sounds. You know what? Just read Funky's dialogue. Just read it because it's I can't do it justice.
Hey man, I'm glad you're back. I need your help. I have dropped my ghetto blaster in the icy water below. Go and get it for me. Shoot the buttons hanging on the wall to lower the water. You only have 3 minutes of juice, so you better get going, dude.
Funky dropped his boombox in the icy water. Oopsie doodles. Butterfingers. I just love that this mission isn't any practical reason other than Funky dropped his boombox.
I love the phrase, I have dropped my ghetto blaster.
Oh heavens me. Oh heavens me. Oh goodness gracious. I have let my ghetto blaster slip from my fingers. Woo. This is so dumb, but I love that it's a little bit of character building for Funky because Funky quickly evolved into the most competent, capable, like ingenious member of the Kongs. And I like when you get those glimpses that Funky is still just a dude at heart. And, you know, for all of his competence, for all of his brilliance and know-how and, like, reliability, occasionally he'll just drop his ghetto blaster in the icy water and you have to go get it for him. Now, when you retrieve it, he has an interesting line of dialogue. He says, "Well done! I can now listen to the DK rap all night long." Which might create a continuity issue, since the DK rap is very much centered around the Donkey Kong 64 cast and the events of Donkey Kong 64. I mean, it's being rapped about the adventure, you know, and the guns they get along the way. But, I've fan-wanked this, of course I have, as, there might have been an earlier version of the DK rap. Because if they honored Donkey Kong with a statue, maybe they also honored him in song. And they told the grand story of Donkey and Diddy getting the Banana Horde back from the Kremlins. And that was the original DK rap, which Funky would have been listening to all night long in 1995. But then the DK rap we're all familiar with, that was covered very poorly in Super Smash Bros. Melee, and then in Donkey Konga, that is the DK Rap 99. An updated version. Of course, then in Universe, one of the DK rappers would come back and do the ukulele rap much, much later. So they just like rapping about the big news events of the day. So, I don't think it's an inconsistency at all. I think it just adds texture to the world. What is that original DK rap? We need to commission the lyrics is what we need to do. I'm sure Grant Kirkhope will do it on a budget, right? Like, we'll just call him up and be like, Grant, hey, buddy, we have a job for you. You want some work? K-Rool's Keep. K-Rool's Keep is here we go again. Kong Napped 2. I.e., we're running out of ideas. Why don't you? No, you read this one, Cameron. I'll read the last one.
A Donkey Kong sequel where Kong gets kidnapped. How original! Okay.
Back again! Ready to hit the skies again? The Kongs have been out exploring but have got themselves trapped. Go and rescue them! Raise and lower the water level using the buttons mounted on the walls. I didn't have time to fill her up. You only have 3 minutes. Flying time.
Why didn't you have time to fill her up, Funky? Like, here you're just saying, I do have more fuel, but there's no time.
It's funny that they're very insistent on this conceit that you're your time limit is dictated by how much gas Funky put in the tank. When, like, if these had just been timed missions with, like, arbitrary limits, I would not have questioned it. Like, oh, somebody's been kidnapped. Well, of course I only have 3 minutes because something could happen to them now that they've been kidnapped. Or I have to fix the statue before all the flitters break it too much to... And instead it's entirely, like, based around how much Funky put in the tank that day.
It's possible that we just don't know that there was kind of a fuel crisis in the Rare Archipelago in 1995. Like, maybe the citizens of Dino Domain and Pterodactyl Lands and, you know, in the Panther Kingdom, the prehistoric area there, they all, like, petitioned the use of fossil fuels in the archipelago.
This thing being such a gas guzzler has got to be the thing he ironed out by DKC3.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a reason this is full of kinks, because it makes DKC3 like the end goal of that, where you get this, like, flawless flying machine. But, also, apparently, Tiny and her classmates haven't been brought back to Donkey Kong Island yet. They're just I guess they're just staying with Funky, and they went out exploring. And, like, why? Why would you let these kids out of your sight? Funky, you're a terrible babysitter. We see that in DKC3. You're like, here's your little toddler cousin. He's pretty heavy. You can break through floors. God, don't trust this guy around kid. Like, I know I just got done saying how empathetic and kind-hearted Funky is. This is one area where he has
just
some
not
shortcomings.
good with children.
He's not good with children. If you are old enough to, I guess, smoke weed with him, then he's cool with you. But just keep your kids away from him. Jeez. Anyway, you gotta rescue Tiny and Co. again. So... yeah. Flying Croc. Another sequel. Oh boy. Toxic Kongstruction. Not Kongstruction 2 at the very least. It's Toxic Kongstruction. I guess this is when the Britney Spears song was big, right? So they wanted to work Toxic in there. So dude, think you're a pro pilot now, do you? Rebuild the DK statue, but beware of entering the toxic waste. The gyrocopter will explode with the slightest touch of that green filth. Use the buttons on the walls to lower the waste, then nip in and retrieve the statue parts. So, yeah, that is Funky's Flights, i.e. the missions you play in Funky's Flights 2. Doing each one, by the way, will earn you a hero coin. Well, wait a second. I thought we got the hero coins from the levels. The hero coins, one of the most perfectly thought out collectibles in any platformer. What do you mean you just get hero coins from Funky? Listen on, my friends. Listen on. So, Wrinkly does not have a big mini game. Kong College is back, and Kong College is pretty faithful to the original vision of Kong College. I think they changed the blackboard up a little bit, but it's basically the same building, probably because they had the render of Kong College that they could really readily transport over. One aspect they did change, which I absolutely adore. The background outside of the door and outside of the windows now changes with every world.
Yeah, I think that's a good bit of, like, giving context to it everywhere it shows up, instead of the very, like, suburban vista that it had by default in the original game, which doesn't really fit anywhere you go.
Yeah, where are these rolling green, finely mowed hills in Crocodile Isle? Because I'm not finding them outside of Kong College. But yeah, you go into Kong College just off the Gangplank Galleon, and you just get the ocean in the background, which that would be distracting for me to have to, like, go to school with the ocean right outside the window, because I would just look out at it. I wouldn't be paying attention. No wonder the Kremlins are bad at math. Now, by the way, Kong College, it's It just looks like an old schoolhouse on the outside. I don't know how to describe it. It might be vaguely barrel-shaped, but they don't really lean in on that as much as they do Cranky and, as we'll discuss, Swanky. But
yeah, it fits the aesthetic of the other buildings just fine. Like it fits in with the Monkey Museum and Clubba's Kiosk pretty well.
It's a good way
I honestly forgot that this wasn't a building in the original game.
It's a good way to translate the concept of a one room schoolhouse into the Donkey Kong aesthetic. I think they find a good.
And I guess
program.
It would be barrel shaped because what we see of the schoolhouse is like cylindrical.
Yeah,
on the inside.
I guess, yeah. So, of course, Wrinkly no longer saves your game, as you can do that whenever you choose. The benefits of gaming in 2004. But Wrinkly still provides hints, as she once did. And there's no dancing minigame here. They were like, well, I guess that's good enough to justify Wrinkly. But we will also make her the one in charge of the scrapbook. So remember in Donkey Kong Country for the GBA, you have the scrapbook element where you collected pictures, photographs, but in a little disposable camera in each level. And you got different renders effectively in this scrapbook. And you had that automatically in DKC, but in DKC 2, Wrinkly is the one to give you the scrapbook as your homework assignment, which is just that little bit of added detail, that added bit of justification or logic that I really do appreciate with most of the stuff they add to this game, because it's oh yeah, Wrinkly's always talking about homework and this and that. She never actually assigns you anything. So to have that be the purpose of the scrapbook in this game, I thought was kind of ingenious, really.
It's a nice little bit of extra flavor to what is essentially you just having an unlockable artwork gallery, which back then I appreciated, even though these are all extremely low resolution. It's just nice to see these renders showcased. I also like the touch that the backdrop for the scrapbook as you thumb through it clearly has Diddy and Dixie have been scribbling in it because there's a heart with an arrow through it that says Dixie.
Yeah.
In the margins.
Like a textbook, like a school notebook or something. Yeah, it's really nice. There are 40 photographs in the game, 39 in the levels again, and then one given to you by Wrinkly at the very end. And I really like that the photographs are in the possession of enemies. And if you find an enemy with the little camera icon over them, you got to take that one out to collect it. It kind of adds a little bit of that coin element to it. Although, there's not that one very specific way you have to get it. You just defeat the regular baddies.
It's a cute extra collectible that I don't think is so obtrusive that you don't feel like you're missing it if you play the original game, but it's neat that it's here.
And again, it doesn't break the structure of the levels because those baddies are going to be there no matter what. So just give one of them this little item and have you be on the lookout for them. Yeah, I think it's pretty deftly handled here. And filling out a page of the scrapbook will also give you a hero coin. What? All right.
I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I do want to just throw this out there. It's really weird that DKC 3, the game where the Super Nintendo version ended with a photo album, does not have this feature.
Yeah. I feel like I generally talk up DKC 3's remake because of all the things it gets right and all the things it avoids, but there are certain things to it where I'm just really? You didn't do that in this one?
It's simultaneously the one that shows the most lessons learned from doing the previous two, but also you just feel the time crunch in it, and I feel like this was a casualty of there. But it's a shame because it's in both of the previous Donkey Kong Country remakes, and it would have made the most sense there.
You felt the time crunch in that one, but you heard the timed crunch in this one. I'm not as clever as you are. So, Swanky, the bonus bonanza is back, although weirdly, they just shortened it to bonus bonanza on the map screen. Why not call it Swanky's bonus bonanza? I guess, no, because they call it Cranky's Hut, so it's not like, whatever.
Yeah, I would have figured maybe they changed Cranky's Hut to put every Kong's name in their, like, building, but they didn't do that.
They didn't do that.
College or
Kong
bonus
College.
bonanza.
They took Swanky's name away from the bonus bonanza. But, yeah, we see the outside, the exterior of the bonus bonanza TV studio at long last. And it's a big barrel. Go figure. But it's a little bit more polished.
It's K. Rool's favorite channel.
There's a big star on the top of the barrel, and the inside has been recontextualized as a big barrel as well. The layout is basically the same as it was on the Super Nintendo, but instead of this like dark, glossy TV studio, now it's light and wooden.
Yeah.
And
it's definitely because the original was just too black to have on a very dim GBA screen.
Yeah, it's... I don't like this one as much because I liked that's... As much as I like the Donkey Kong aesthetic, I do like when you just have, you know, a TV studio. Yeah, this is just a gorilla in a regular TV studio. You know, it almost, I don't want to say it cheapens it, but it just kind of makes it in some ways less funny when you kind of bring it down to their level.
Yeah, I feel like what we saw in the original version of DKC2 was more heightened and that made it funnier.
Yeah.
But like this isn't bad. I still think it's like appropriate for Swanky.
I agree, and I do like the added touches of the studio lights above you and the like two cameras, the two TV cameras. Just really, really great touch there to let you know this is televised. This isn't just a mad person who thinks he's hosting a game show. You are actually on the bonus bonanza.
And there's two very elaborate additions here. One of them being Swanky gets a dedicated second screen.
Yeah.
For when you come on down and answer the quiz questions, but also an entirely newly implemented character.
Yeah, I guess because they found a use for Espresso, and they were like, well, that accounts for everyone, except... And then they felt guilty, and they're like, we should find a way to work in Candy Kong. Candy Kong, who was famously bumped from DKC2. The explanation given on Rare's website was they felt she detracted from the relationship between Diddy and Dixie, because here's Donkey Kong's bereaved girlfriend worried about him.
Right, it would be a little tonally weird to have a very flirty NPC saving your game when you're traveling with your girlfriend to save her boyfriend.
Right. Yeah, that could get ugly very quickly. I think we've seen some of that play out on the Donkey Kong Country cartoon, except with Donkey and Dixie and Diddy's interpretation of the events. But yeah, Candy's there as kind of the Vanna White, the game show assistant. What was it on The Price is Right? Barker's Beauties. So a little less skeevy here because all she does is just stand there, and I guess like she's just there to gesture to the question. She doesn't do anything. She's not there for any practical purpose. They do put her in a new dress.
It's like she's something.
I do like her design from what we can see of this, because she's not wearing the bathing suit. She's wearing a pink dress, like a formal wear almost, and she's got a flower in her hair. I would have really liked to see a better like resolution image of this Candy design.
Yeah, I don't know if the model would hold up at that resolution, but it would be fun to just have this TV presenter Candy just as like a frame of reference.
Yeah, so I always joke, I guess Candy came with them, but she was too broken up to actually contribute, so she just selflessly decided to become a TV star in the meantime, while the others, did the work. But, yeah, Swanky's bonus bonanza otherwise plays out the same. However, if you win all the quizzes, there's actually a reason to play the quizzes now beyond getting the lives. If you win all the quizzes, he gives you a picture of himself for the scrapbook, which isn't weird at all. I mean, other people who go on game shows, they get like the home version of the game show, or they win a washer dryer, or something. And for Swanky, you get a picture of
Grunty
him.
was offering better prizes than Swanky.
right. I had to wait years to get that plush Grunty from Fangamer. So like, you're right here. Yeah. So Swanky also runs a service. And this is just another implementation of Swanky Kong. Like, they're trying to find more uses for the characters, I guess. Swanky runs a service where if you want to fight a boss again, you don't just go back into the boss fight. You have to pay him 10 banana coins. And then if you beat
really did not like this.
It's cheap. It's a change that makes the game worse. Like, some of these changes are just to bring it in line with modern conventions, like you can now save anywhere. Which, as much as I like the conceit of save points because I'm a child of the 90s, I get it. I do get it. But this actually makes it harder to play. This makes a feature that was readily abundant in the first version, like, more gated this time around.
Right. Because sometimes, I'll be playing a game and I'll think, well, you know what, I want to go through just the ending again. So I want to fight K. Rool. I want to like beat him and let the credits roll and just see that all play out. But yeah, in this version, if you want to fight K. Rool again, you got to pony up 10 coins, Buster.
Yeah, he does give you prizes based on how well you performed. It's kind of like Swanky's Sideshow in DKC3. But no, it's just, it just kind of sucks. And I understand if you play, because I think your banana coins save this time around, right? They don't just go away when you turn off the game. So
yeah, mercifully you can like stockpile them in this version.
It might have been the thinking like, well, if we're going to give that, we've got to give more uses for the banana coins. Because it's the big problem of the retro games, right? You eventually have 999 banana coins and nowhere to really spend them. And, or like doubloons in Sea of Thieves. It's just like, oh god, I'm never going to spend these doubloons rare because you took away all the reasons to use the doubloons. So it does make sense to justify that because they do give you that extra perk. But, yeah. Even if it was like 2 banana coins, 10 banana coins? Really? Nothing costs that much.
Yeah. It's the difference between like, if I'm out of coins for anything else in the game, I can just hop into like one level and get as many as I need.
Mm-hmm.
10 that's, you gotta be saving up.
Yeah.
It's too much.
And there might be one boss fight in particular that you do want to experience a few more times because of the novelty of it.
You might want to do the boss just to replay it again, and because you think the boss is fun, and if you didn't do it fast enough, Swanky will admonish you for not doing it very well. So that also kind of takes the wind out of your sails.
Yeah.
All you wanted to do was just replay a fight.
But then you get talked down to by a cheesy game show host, which has to be the most demoralizing feeling. So before we get into the boss I alluded to, let's talk about Clubba. Clubba, who is personally one of my favorite Kremlings. I really like Clubba. I wish Clubba was utilized more than he has in his 2 appearances, and then this reappearance or this reinterpretation of his first appearance. Clubba's kiosk is back. It effectively serves the same function as it does the first.
You can still fight him.
You can still try to fight him, right? Like you said, you now have the luxury of, you still unlock a Lost World level in each Clubba's kiosk, but then you can traverse the Lost World, you can backtrack in Lost World, and you're not having to go back to that particular Clubba to go to that particular Lost World level, which, is a smart quality of life improvement. I might like how it's done in the original DKC, but I do understand how archaic and just regimented that is for no other reason than that's just the way they designed it. So the big addition for Clubba, though, is the third and final bonus game. And probably my least favorite, because I don't hate this one, but it feels the least consequential. Bag-a-Bug. For some reason, you're running around Clubba's kiosk, and maybe because it's always been presented kind of like a swampy environment. They got the idea, well, what's in a swamp? Fireflies? Are fireflies in swamps? Sure, fireflies. What if, Diddy and Dixie are kids? What do kids like to do on a summer's eve? They like to go around catching fireflies in jars. So let's do that, and let's have Clubba chase them around the perimeter.
I like to think in universe, this was just like, they asked Clubba to play a game, and his idea was, okay, how about a game where I run around and try to beat you to death?
Clubba's trying. He's trying to understand them. He's trying not to be a bully and a brute, but all he knows is smash. Smash with his club. He is Clubba, after all. It's kind of his thing. So his idea of a game, is, okay, you run around and try to get this amount of fireflies, and I'll try to beat you to death. I do like the way Clubba's kiosk looks, because they had to redesign it from a top-down perspective, and it's got that great appearance of this era, this team. The sprite work is, it's got that same sheen to it, kind of like the smooth, polished appearance that you get in things like Saberwolf or Grunty's Revenge.
Yeah, it's fun seeing this for like a very familiar piece of architecture.
It's also fun seeing that new model of Clubba. It's the first new model of Clubba we've ever gotten. And, I like that aspect of it, but there's less reason to do this than the other ones.
And I don't think this isn't like a bespoke version of this minigame for every single world. It's just, it's kind of like how Swanky's minigames were in DKC3 originally. Mm-hmm. Just, this is a way for you to accrue lives.
Yeah. And so, items. Honestly, you do this once, and then you might never do it again. But, like I said, at the very least, it's a little bit more of Clubba, one of my favorite Kremlings.
Yeah. It's pretty harmless, and I like that it doesn't override anything that was in the original game. Like, you can go to Clubba's and never even pick this option.
Right.
And just interact with him solely like you did in the original game.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of Kremlings, speaking of favorite Kremlings, this is a lot of people who got into Donkey Kong around this time have a lot of fond memories of this Kremling in particular. An original character created for the GBA remake of this game. And this is something that once the team got a taste of, they would really have fun with in DKC3. They were like, oh yeah, we can do new characters? Okay, yeah, let's add to the tapestry that is Donkey Kong while we still can. So we got Kerosine, a new boss battle exclusive to this version of DKC2, replacing the fake out of Stronghold Showdown in the original game. And for those who aren't familiar or may have forgotten, in the first version of DKC2, you get to the top of K. Rool's Keep, you think this is it. This is the fight with K. Rool. Donkey Kong is going to be in here. You go into this chamber. Donkey Kong is indeed being tied up. And then you get the victory fanfare. And then Diddy and Dixie react as Donkey is getting pulled up. It's not really presented in the most clear manner. It's kind of hard to decipher what's happening at first, but Donkey Kong gets airlifted And then on the map screen, we see K. Rool, like climbing up this ladder that's just dropped into his airship, the Flying Croc. And then it's like, surprise, there's more. There's more of the game. You're not at the end yet. And then that takes you into the Flying Croc level, or Flying Croc world, which is just a level, 2 Kong helpers, and a boss fight. But they didn't do that this time around. And I think the thinking was, this is, DKC2 all over again. A lot of people will be replaying this. What if we surprise them? I think there was a lot of this in the air at Rare during this era, because this would have been around the same time they were thinking about doing Banjo X, the Xbox remake of Banjo-Kazooie, that they only pulled the plug on when Conquer Live and Reloaded had a middling reception. But part of the, philosophy behind Banjo X was, we're going to take gamers off guard who are expecting the same thing. We're going to abruptly change things in the adventure and have meta commentary on that. And so you won't just get to rely on your reflexes from the first game. So I think that was just a lot of philosophy at Rare.
If you're going to do something like that, this is a very unobtrusive place to do it. Because, as you said, it is just a cutscene in the original. It's this is open real estate to do something new with.
Right. It's not upending DKC2 for the lulz like they were going to do in Banjo X. This is actually room to put something in there that might surprise and delight older fans. And for the newer fans, they'll just accept it, And Kerosine is an interesting character, though, because he is in some ways similar to K. Lumsey in that he's a giant. He's a literal giant. I know I just got done saying you can't really get too bogged down in the details of scale in Rare games, but Kerosine is literally supposed to be a huge, hulking, ginormous Kremling.
This is kind of the debut of the head and hands boss in the Donkey Kong series.
yeah, which would become a lot more prevalent in the years to come.
Kerosine does have a body, but it is in the background. His head and hands are in the foreground of this fight.
I guess he's just standing on an awning on K. Rool's keep. He's still giant, but yeah, you're fighting this on the roof. You're not in the chamber you were in the Super Nintendo version. When I first saw screenshots of this, I thought what would happen is you would go into Stronghold Showdown and then Kerosine would punch the wall out and then he's there. It's not that elaborate. It's just you go up on the roof and then K. Rool says, haha, you thought that was the end? Get a load of Kerosine, and then Kerosine appears. And Kerosine is very much his model. It's very clear this is an original character because he has that smooth, shiny appearance of the original sprite work of this game, which I like, which I do like. I'm not upset that he looks like he doesn't look like he's from 1995.
Right. The trade-off is that he is incongruous with the rest of the assets swirling around him this entire time.
Yeah.
His animation's a little bit weird, partly because of him being modular like this. I don't think this is something that Donkey Kong Country bosses did a whole lot, even though a lot of other bosses in 16-bit games around this time did this. This idea of bosses that are modular parts that may be in presentation supposed to be one connected being, but have are made up of specific parts cut up and flying around disparately.
Yeah. Which, I mean, hey, the Donkey Kong series hadn't done it up until this point, so it's fun to see.
They do the same thing with Croctopus in DKC 3 GBA, so they clearly saw potential in being able to do this.
Right. And he's a fire-breathing Kremling. He's basically a dragon. And the other big detail of Kerosine, besides the fact that he has clearly defined nipples, thank God, is that he's initially holding two cleaver-like swords, which is very interesting that they added that detail, because it like raises even more questions about cleaver and how common cleaver is.
Also, like, makes him kind of a reverse of the cleaver fight, where you start off fighting a hand with a sword, and then you just get the sword. Here, you're fighting hands with swords, and you just get the hands.
Mm-hmm. There is some fan interpretation that, is Kerosine the fiery hand that was holding cleaver in Crocodile Cauldron? And I don't think that's the case. I think the original intent...
I don't think that hand was swole enough to be this guy.
No. I think the original intent was the fake out. You think you're fighting some sort of lava monster, but it turns out the sword has been in control this entire time. Whereas, with Kerosine, he's clearly the one wielding these swords. So, I guess they just had, like, stock giant swords, and Cleaver was enchanted, or I know Courtney has a theory that, like, Cleaver is being possessed by, like, the spirit of the Kremling who wielded them, or whatever.
And
but
for that token, there could be, like, multiple swords that look like Cleaver, and just one of them is possessed by that specific spirit.
Sure. So, you know, I like the Kerosine's there. Like I said, it would be one thing if this version replaced the Super Nintendo version, but that was never going to be the case. So, this isn't like a Star Wars Special Edition thing, where it's like, what are you doing? There doesn't need to be the scene with Jabba the Hutt here. We already got this information from Greedo. And you can never really have access to the original version in high quality legally ever again. And, you know, that new version becomes the only canon version. This is Schrodinger's canon, right? Both versions are canon. And, you can just like go back and forth, and it doesn't really matter. So
right.
I'm fine with it.
And because there was nothing here in the original, you can just kind of like do the mental pave over yourself of like, okay, Kerosine happened, but it was off screen. We didn't see it.
I do a lot of that mental paving over with the GBA trilogy, because it is just like, how can you reconcile this with the original version? Sometimes it works really easily. Sometimes it requires like pages and pages of bullshit, which is fun too. So, the differences in the end game, Cameron, this is where I start to get critical. I've saved my barbs up until now.
Rightfully so, I think.
Yeah. Like I said, do not get me wrong, dear listeners. I greatly appreciate that this game exists. And I understand the concessions that were made. I like so many of the new additions. If you're going to do a remake of Donkey Kong Country 2, it could go a lot worse than this. Where it fumbles the bag a little bit, and by a little bit I mean utterly, completely, is the ending. Now, initially I'm intrigued, because the first ending starts off with a new cutscene, and you're just like, oh, cool. Because we had never seen what happens after K. Rool gets uppercutted out of the flying croc. He bounces down Crocodile Isle. He gets gobbled up by the sharks. And then you just cut to the Monkey Museum. So here we get this little extra bit where Cranky appears, and it's just like, well, shit, you did it. You just rescued Donkey Kong. And then nobody's flying the flying croc, and the flying croc starts to crash. And so Cranky, Dixie, Diddy, and Donkey all go up topside, like on the hull of the flying croc, on like the snout of it. And it starts to blow up, and it starts to like fall out of the sky. And then Funky flies in with a gyrocopter, and each Kong hops in the gyrocopter and saves them from the flying croc. I like that detail, Cameron. Like, that's a fun extra cutscene, and it's just like, well, yeah, he did lose the flying croc, K. Rool. Like, it did get destroyed. So to actually see that in action, like, I always just assumed it was destroyed when Crocodile Isle blew up, like the Kremling source punctured the flying croc as well. But this works too.
I just never really considered it. It's another thing like Kerosine where, like, you added something that didn't really override anything.
Yeah.
So,
and it sets up like the Payon continuity where Payon like retconned the flying croc as the K Cruiser 1, defined K. Rool's airship in DK64 as the K Cruiser 2, and then we got the K Cruisers 3 and 4 in King of Swing and Jungle Climber. Like, that's like next level Donkey Kong continuity. That's like the lore that like only the truest Kong heads share and prize. But I'm fine with it all, like up until that point. But just like the flying croc fell out of the sky, so too do all of the alterations to the endings of Donkey Kong Country 2 just utterly collapse from here on out. So, one of the great bits from the original game is that K. Rool does get eaten by sharks. And for a brief time, if you're not spoiled, if you don't... like, for a brief time, Donkey Kong Country 3 had yet to come out.
Even then, if you had only gotten this ending and then moved on to Donkey Kong Country 3, Donkey Kong Country 3 was trying to sell you on the Kremlings have a new leader.
Yes.
So you could totally interpret this as like, oh, K. Rool is shark food. He's gone now.
Yeah, I completely bought into this in 95 at the time. For probably a month afterwards, or maybe 3 weeks. I forget how long it took me to beat K. Rool in the Flying Croc and then get all the Krem coins and finally beat Animal Antics to get into the Crocodile Core. But for a good amount of time, at least through the Christmas holiday, I was under the operating impression that K. Rool was dead. That Rare actually killed him off. And there would be no more K. Rool from here on out. I mean, originally it was going to be Clubba in the Crocodile Core. So we could have had an alternate timeline where, yeah, this is the end of K. Rool's story. And DKC3 really would have had a new boss character who wasn't a fake out. But, of course, the big reveal is K. Rool survived. Presumably, the Kremling source healed him from his shark wounds. And you fight him in the Crocodile Core, in the shrine around the Kremling source. And that is the final battle of the game. That's supposed to be a big reveal, right? But here, you see K. Rool fall down Crocodile Isle. You see him fall into the ocean. There are no sharks this time around. And then you immediately cut to him in the Crocodile Core, covered in the seaweed, and he says, "Come to my lair in the Lost World if you think you can really beat me."
Yeah, I'm not a fan. It undermines the twist. Diegetically, I don't know how they're able to hear any of this. And also it ruins the brick joke of him coming back covered in seaweed and dripping with water. Yeah.
In my show notes, I wrote "piss off" with this because it really irritates me. When we talk about like the ending of Donkey Kong Country 2, we usually talk about the true ending, the 102% ending. But a lot of times what we bake into that is the build up to that, which is a slow walk from K. Rool Duel in the Flying Croc to the reveal in the Lost World to the true ending. It's all like a piece. It's all a perfectly constructed, like, surprise after surprise to this giant catharsis, this beautiful image on the Super Nintendo, probably the best usage of their Silicon graphics workstations on the Super Nintendo, creating this lovely, almost screensaver image on your TVs in 95. It's all so deftly handled. It's why I don't like the ending of DKC 3, because it's comparatively a wet fart, right? It has no gravitas. DKC 2's ending had grandeur. It had beauty, and it had like melancholy. It had contemplation. It had that feeling of victory. It was a victory well earned. And the GBA just erodes that brick by brick. It just tears it down with all of these stupid little choices, Cameron. And again, like, I don't want to be so hard on this, but I was fine in some areas. The Donkey Kong 64ification of Donkey Kong Country 2. I'm fine with that in some places, because this is never going to have the same tone, the same atmosphere as the Super Nintendo version. But they really just trampled this ending. By the way, this is kind of an aside, but you're then taken to Cranky's Video Game Heroes screen, and it's no longer in this dark background, in this like dark back room of the Monkey Museum.
I'm not a fan of this revision either, though I understand why they couldn't use the background. It's the same problem with Swanky's.
Yeah, it's now set on like a rocky coast. It's it's on the beach, and you know, it's fine. But one interesting thing, to better reflect the era in which this version came out, 2004, compared to when the original came out in 1995, Link is now the default second place position ahead of Yoshi, because in the original, on the podiums, Mario was the default first place with 39 hero coins. Yoshi was in second place because Yoshi was really going through like the height of his career in 95. Yoshi's Island had just come out.
It was a pre-Ocarina of Time world.
Yeah, Yoshi was one of the primary Nintendo IPs. Like, always related to Mario, but really his own thing at that point in time. Like, considered his own series. And I mean, still is, but less so than Donkey Kong is, or Wario is, you know. It was just a unique snapshot in time where Link, it felt like it had been years since the last Legend of Zelda game. And I mean, when you're a kid, it really did feel like it felt like Link was almost a relic, a link to the past, if you will. And again, pre-Ocarina of Time, Ocarina of Time is really what sold it, right? Like, it really like made Link a forever icon right underneath Mario in the Nintendo canon, the Nintendo pantheon. But in the original game, Link was in third place. And if Didier collected enough hero coins, chances are you would never even see Link, because he would already be on the podium and Link would just be off to the screen. Yeah. But they changed the order here because it was 2004 and you can't have Yoshi ahead of Link. That's ridiculous. But can we talk? Oh, they also got rid of the No Hopers bin. There's no dig at Sonic the Hedgehog, because at this point, Sega and Nintendo are pretty friendly. They're pretty chummy. Chummier than Nintendo and Rare are at this point in time. And Earthworm Jim.
Nobody even remembers Earthworm Jim at this point.
I was going to say Earthworm Jim had kind of just dropped off the cultural radar completely, so no need to have a dig at Earthworm Jim anymore. But can we talk now about my biggest gripe about the collectibles of this game? Because I'm okay with the golden feathers, I'm okay with the photographs. Random and arbitrarily, they decided to up the number of hero coins. Originally, it was 40 hero coins, and then Donkey Kong Country 3 added an extra hero. Here's number 41. Okay, cool. Ooh, one more hero coin. That's cool. This is the sequel, after all. For some reason, Cameron, there's 68 hero coins in the remake. 68. Why 68?
It's not a whole number, and you were one short of it being the funny number.
Yes, and I feel like at one point it had to be 69, right? And somebody said, no, you can't do, that's too obvious. Take out that hero coin, it's 68. But even then, I said before how much I admire the whole idea of the hero coin. I think it's the perfect collectible. It's this big gold spinning item, expertly hidden in many of the levels. One per level. There's an elegance to it. There's a beauty to it. It's only there for the extra textual bragging rights of Diddy Kong is now a video game hero on par with these other Nintendo icons. It's terrific. It's perfectly balanced. And here they just give them out like candy at Halloween time. Oh yeah, you got this page of the scrapbook filled up. Here's a hero coin. Oh yeah, thank you. You rescued Tiny Kong and her classmates. Here's a hero coin. I don't like it.
It does feel like the other Kongs should not have Cranky's video game hero coins. They're not like Jiggy's where you just accept that, like, oh, here's something that was stuck under my armpit, or I found this under my foot, or I looked in my dresser last night and there this was.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like the hero coins implicitly are things Cranky Kong himself hid around the world, and you are proving yourself to him by finding them. So it's a wee bit weird that Funky just has a bunch of them.
Right. I don't like this change. I think this is another inelegant thing about the remake. And again, it's factored into the end game, which I just completely loathe. So now to talk about like paving over inconsistencies and having both versions work, I do, in my headcanon, think that Cranky has two metrics for judging video game heroes. There's what if there's 40 hero coins and what if there's 68? And so he's got the one in the back room of the Monkey Museum, and then he's got one just outside. And so it's like, yeah, if like I've crunched the numbers, right? And if there were only 40 hero coins, it turns out Yoshi would get more than Link. But if there's 68, it turns out that Link would get more than Yoshi. Don't question it. It's just the way the math works.
Yoshi's not as good with the gyrocopter.
Yeah, that's it, right? Yeah, Yoshi Yoshi doesn't know the first thing about photography, about scrapbooking. He's a yarner. He's a crocheter. He doesn't know about scrapbooking. That's a different craft entirely. Another thing I hate about the ending is then you go into, I guess I do like the character parade, because the character parade at least takes the characters across different environments other than Clubba's Kiosk. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I like that they try to add some animation so they're not just like sliding across the screen to mixed results, but
yeah. I would dispute that one of the things that made that character parade work was the very pointed choice to make Clubba's Kiosk the backdrop to kind of clue in gamers. And there's more. Have you really explored all of Clubba's Kiosks? Like, the game's not over yet. Just a very subtle nudge without having K. Rool show up and say, oh, that really smarted. No matter. I am here in my lair in the Lost World. Come and find me and we'll go again. Mwahahaha. Again, like, DKC 2, I feel like the original version respected your intelligence. And at this point in the GBA remake, they're like, oh, gamers are dumb. we need to really hold their hands through this.
It robs the non 100% ending of a sense of finality.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you do get the speech from Cranky about, well, if I'd been playing, I would have done the Lost World and made sure K. Rool couldn't come back again. But you still have the grandeur of the credits and the character parade, and it all feels very final, even if you don't pick up the game again.
That's the thing that I don't think gets brought up enough, and that's a really well thought out point. The first ending of DKC2 is complete, and it's rewarding. And if you did stop playing the game right there, even though you would never see the far superior, more beautiful ending, you would still be happy and contented. That's the mark of good storytelling, I say. To make matters worse, though, then you get the staff credits. Why did they then have the backdrop to the staff credits be the glory shot of the game's true ending? Granted, it's far uglier on the GBA than it was on the Super Nintendo, because the ocean, it's set at a far brighter sunset than it was in the first time around, and now the ocean is piss yellow. I mean, the color of pee-pee, urine, bladder juice. It looks like it's from Conker's Bad Fur Day, because I have never seen an ocean look like a discontinued flavor of Mountain Dew. But now I have, because of the GBA remake to DKC2. But this is it. This is the shot you had to preserve for the true ending of the game. The shot that makes everyone go, whoa. And the shot where you just sit in front of your TV, slack-jawed, just completely in awe.
This shot is your reward for doing the
2% ending,
completion.
right? It's the meme of Martin Scorsese holding up his arms and saying cinema. I mean, that was the first time I ever did that, and I was just like, this is art. I have seen God. I have seen the Godhead presented to me via Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest. But on the subtitleless version on the GBA, they're like, oh, here you go. Fuck it. You might not see this. You're a dumb gamer. We're just going to give it to you now just in case. Because we had to really work hard to make that ocean look like pee. I'm getting angry.
You told them to piss off, and they said, well, if you insist.
And it really does feel like the entire staff of this game have just pissed in this for you. Because their names are juxtaposed against this sea of piss. I hate it. And then the true ending. You do the work. You finish the Lost World. You fight Captain K. Rool in Crocodile Core. And the true ending, again, widely held up as the best and most memorable, not just in the Donkey Kong series, not just in any DK game, but maybe the entire DKU. One of the best endings in any Nintendo game, at least as far as payoff and feeling rewarded. It's been turned into something, and I use an analogy in my show notes, and I'm going to actually draw upon this. Do you remember what's inaffectionately referred to as Monkey Christ?
Yes, I do.
So, in the early 2010s, there was this fresco of Jesus in, I think, a Spanish church or monastery, and it was, worse for wear. It had to be restored, and the unqualified art restorer turned this very classic depiction of white Jesus into this ghastly monkey looking man with big black eyes, no pupils. It looks like the revision of the Joker in the Batman animated series when they simplified all the designs and they're like, let's just get rid of the Joker's eyes and just have him have little black pupils. And that's what the true ending to DKC2 GBA feels like me. It feels like someone came along and took a classic work of art and painted over it like they were doing finger paints in preschool. I really hate this ending. I know I complain about the DKC3 ending. I know I complain about the Donkey Kong Country Returns ending. You know, the Moon Punch. This is my least favorite ending to any Donkey Kong game, which is unfortunate because it's the remake to my favorite ending to any Donkey Kong game. This makes the ending to Donkey Kong Land, where you just get congratulations with a period. That makes that feel like the biggest victory lap I've ever had in comparison to this, which makes it feel like the game is upset at me. It's mad at me for finishing the game. It thinks I've wasted my time. It believes the critics, the contemporary critics who say Donkey Kong Country is overrated, and it really wants to make me feel bad for sticking up for it.
The funniest thing is I don't even think we've gotten to the biggest point of sacrilege in the alterations to this ending.
No, I have to set the stage for it to really let the listener walk away and understand my grievances and your grievances too, although I think I might be getting angrier about it than you are. So first of all, for no reason whatsoever, we have a new added scene. Now, I've liked all the added scenes up until this point, aside from K. Rool in the Crocodile Core. But for some reason, we're back on the Congo beach. Donkey Kong is in his restored beach chair. Maybe he got a new one. He's once again drinking a banana milkshake. Cranky, Diddy, and Dixie are there. And they're all dancing alongside Donkey Kong. They're having a beach party. Which, okay. But Crocodile Isle was getting ready to explode. Why are you having this beach party when you just had to escape from Crocodile Isle in quite a hurry because it was about to go down? Like, all the Kongs, all the animal buddies, their new animal buddy friends, like Radley and Squitter, who live on Crocodile Isle, had to come with them. It was like, where's Radley? We have to get Radley. We have to save Radley's life. That panic. And then they barely make it back to Donkey Kong Island. And then they, in the original game, Donkey, Diddy, and Dixie sit on that rocky outcropping, looking out the ocean, looking out the sea, watching Crocodile Isle explode. But apparently in between that, there's time for a beach party, Cameron. Apparently it wasn't as urgent as we all thought. Apparently they had a few hours, maybe a day, to get off Crocodile Isle. Considering the ocean isn't even piss yellow here, I'm guessing they had like a whole afternoon to kill.
I don't know. I guess maybe the Kremlings did have time to evacuate. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just the ones who had like stubbed their toe or like they just slept through it. The ones who worked the night shift, unfortunately, all perished. So, okay, we do get the scene of Crocodile Isle going down, but it's so much worse. For one, it has been robbed of all nuance. It has been robbed of all grandeur. It has been robbed of whatever melancholy might have been in there, because this was the setting to the game. I'm not even talking about like empathizing with the Kremlings, or what about the poor Kremlings who weren't part of the Kremlin crew? What about like the wildlife? What about all that? I'm not even getting into that. I'm just getting into you've spent the entire adventure on this island and now you're seeing it be destroyed. There's something sad about that, but also victorious. It's a game that makes you feel the classic Greg Mail's Wheel of Emotions that I always go on about. That's like this intrinsic part of Greg Mail's games, making you feel all the feelings. First of all, Crocodile Isle doesn't explode in this one. It just kind of sinks in the ocean. It just gets pulled down, right? Like you just, it's very clearly just getting like yoinked below the sea with some like rumble effects on the ocean, but we never see the Kremling source pierce the top of the island, and you have that explosion. It just falls. It just falls into the sea. And that's very deflating, right? Because so much of the magic of the first ending, the original ending, is that this mysterious energy source that you see pulsating from the map screen of the Lost World, and then you go in and there's a shrine around it, and then it ultimately destroys Crocodile Isle. And it's never fully explained what it is, except from what we have to go on in the instruction manual. And it just led to 1,000 fan theories, so much speculation, and the fact that it was this like instrument of Crocodile Isle's demise, like this literal bullet that pierced it and ruined it. We don't even get that in this game. It's not on the map screen. It only appears in the level itself, in the boss fight. And it doesn't appear at this ending either. So it's like so many strikes in a row. Like it's already got 3 strikes for me. But then, to really rub that salt into the wound, there's dialogue. There's so much chit chat in this ending. And again, what made the first ending work was it was silent. It was contemplative. It was the characters looking out at sea. And you could project whatever feelings you were feeling onto them. And it was beautiful. You did have K. Rool sail away and then have that laugh to know, like, oh, there's going to be more adventures to come.
Yeah. Yeah, the silent ambiguity of it, of like, well, he lived, he might be back, but he's not coming out of this in good shape.
No, like, and I would argue
this is a retreat.
I would argue this ending really did set up the rest of Rare's tenure with Donkey Kong. And really has impacted the Kremlings every time they've appeared since, like in the Payon games. It was this point of no return for the Kremlings. Like, they never really recovered from this, and then Donkey Kong Country 3 kind of played into this a little bit. Donkey Kong 64 was all about the retribution. Like, the payback is here. We are going to destroy Donkey Kong Island with our new mechanical Crocodile Isle. So, to completely just bulldoze all of that for finality? I don't know what they were doing. You're right. The ambiguity of the original version of this works so well. And here you have, and they have sound effects in this game, so I don't know why they just couldn't have K. Rool laugh and just leave it at that. But apparently they thought they had to just put a bigger period on it. And so K. Rool says, and this is the full dialogue, "I'll get you yet, you stupid monkeys." Is that really the thing you're going to be saying as your island goes down the toilet? I'll get you yet, you stupid monkeys.
I look at how far away the Kongs are, and I feel like they'd just be saying, what?
What? Yeah.
Does he have he has a speaking trumpet from Sea of Thieves, is what he has.
We know he's a grade 4 Reaper, so it would stand to reason he has a speaking trumpet, but I can at least make this more palatable in my headcanon. So this is what K. Rool was saying. The Kongs never heard a word of it.
Right.
This is just the side of the conversation or the Kongversation, the K. Rool-versation that we never heard. So he says, "Next time there will be no stopping me. Awahaha." Which I'm not sure where this confidence comes from, K. Rool. Like, I know you laughed sinisterly in the original version, but you just kind of lost everything. Like, my dude. Like, I would lick your wounds and really take a few months off from this. But, that would be bad enough. If it ended right there, I'd be like, wow, they really cheapened that. But apparently they just wanted to obliterate any doubt that there was going to be disappointment with this, because then off screen there's another character talking who says, "I don't think that's going to happen, dude. Bombs away." And sure enough, here comes Funky Kong in the gyrocopter, which, by the way, the little gyrocopter sprite juxtaposed next to this image of Donkey, Diddy, and Dixie, this like lovely rendered animation of them that was like the most beautiful thing on the entirety of the Super Nintendo. To have this like janky little sprite, which works in isolation, but to have it just no. And then Funky flies in on the prototype gyrocopter. He drops a bomb on K-Rool's little boat. K-Rool sinks. His boat blows up and he sinks. And he says, "Blast, you pesky apes. I'll get you next time." Which, if you were going to add that finality of Funky literally bombing K-Rool off the face of the earth, why would you then have K-Rool say more? What is the point to any of this? Ugh.
It really feels like they just wanted to give Funky Kong a moment, but he didn't earn one.
No, all Funky Kong did was let Tiny and her friends wander away and get lost in Crocodile Isle yet again. I love Funky as a character, right? I'm all for more Funky. I would say the more Funky, the better the experience is, usually. This is a rare instance where more Funky utterly harms the final product, because Funky did not need to show up here. Funky completely just killed the mood. A mood that was already pretty dead. What Funky did was come along and look at the body and say, "Yeah, I can tenderize that a little bit more." And I'm so angry now. Do we even talk about Diddy's Dash, which is the only other thing to talk about? It's this game's time trial mode. It's like DK
Time
Attack.
trials. You don't have to pay 10 coins to do it.
Yeah. It's like DK Attack from the last one, which was pretty much based on Time Attack from Donkey Kong Land 3. Of course, time trials have become a mainstay of the Donkey Kong Country series in the retro era, but here all the bonus areas and hero coins are removed, although bonus barrels are still there, oddly enough. Like, you can still go into the bonus areas, you just get bounced back, which it just slows you down then.
Probably a smart thing to have in this game. I will be honest, I didn't really mess with it very much, because time trials are kind of where I just peter out as far as 100%ing Donkey Kong Country games go.
I'm that way with the retro games. I've never been able to get a shiny gold on any of those time trials in the retro games. With the rare versions, it's pretty simple. You have to do it twice. I think Cranky comes back. There's a 5-minute time limit for all of them. Like, can you do this faster than 5 minutes? And then Cranky says, "Now beat my times." And then you gotta beat Cranky's times. And I did this. I completed Diddy's Dash. Canonically speaking, I did do this before I finished the game, because I was like, well, it doesn't make any sense to do Diddy's Dash after Crocodile Isle sinks. Although maybe it would have let me cool down a little bit from my rage. There's no hero mode in this one. There's no like yellow Diddy mode or whatever.
I guess it'd be a yellow Dixie mode.
Yeah, that's right. There's nothing like that. There's no, we're going to raise Crocodile Isle so Dixie can do it by herself. None of that. Ordinarily, I would miss something like that, but it's kind of hard to make it work in Donkey Kong Country 2. In the context of DKC GBA, you can like shoehorn that in, and it doesn't like break too much. Kind of hard to do when the actual ending of the game is breaking everything. But, alright, Cameron. Alright. I need to like light a lavender candle or something to really like soothe me, because we have some calls to take. Now, of course, you can always call the DK Vine hotline at 1-202-630-VINE-8463. We got 4 calls on this one. Why don't we play them and discuss what they have to say? I feel like there's not going to be people as angry as I just got about the ending. I feel like most of these are going to be like, I grew up with this game. This is my first Donkey Kong game. I wouldn't be who I am today without Donkey Kong Country 2 for the Game Boy Advance. And then I'm going to feel really bad. I'm going to feel really shitty about how hard I just went. I said so many nice things before that, though, so apologies. Apologies, everyone. We can't be positive 102% of the time, because you get that 102% ending, and look where it leads you. All right, first call.
Hey, this is Situated Night. Apologies for the last call. This is really my 3rd time calling, because that last time I just hadn't fully thought out what I was going to say, and I started seriously blundering, so apologies. But anyway, I was born approximately 25 years ago, and Donkey Kong Country 2 came out 20 years ago, and this was a large part of my childhood, and how I got introduced to the Donkey Kong Country series and Donkey Kong in general, and yeah, just a very nostalgic thing for me overall. But I wanted to touch on a specific point, which is, so I've heard Kerosine get a bit of hate, if I'm not mistaken, by certain DK Vine staff members. And I would like to advocate for this Orange Beast, because I think, from my perspective, having experienced the Game Boy Advance game as if that was the original, and just having to draw all my conclusions from that, I think that Kerosine was a seriously good addition rather than superficial or even negative. And how I viewed it is, so in Crocodile Cauldron you have Cleaver as a boss, and that's a sword that is somehow suspended in midair and just magically flashing this way and that, and it's a lava world. And then at the end of K. Rool's Keep, there's Kerosine, and so I imagine the Kerosine has some sort of affinity with lava, such that in Crocodile Cauldron he is somehow invisible and just exposes himself as this disembodied sword. Yet at the end of K. Rool's Keep, K. Rool is severely flustered when seeing how boisterously Diddy Kong avails himself through these various trials, and so he's like, Kerosine, I need you, I know you like the lava world, but you need to appear in your true form and keep this Diddy Kong from coming up to my, whatever his ship is called. But yeah, I always thought it was kind of an epic moment just to get to the very top of Crocodile Isle, and there's just this monstrous, Giga Kremling sort of creature. Hello, this is Situated Night again. Sorry, I just got cut off, but as I was saying, yeah, just going to cut this off very shortly, but Kerosine was just a character who, as a child, it was very stimulating to the imagination, and I can only see it as a positive addition to the game. And even if I imagine even if I was born and experienced the original SNES version previously, I could see, like, I mean, they're making a new version. At least they're adding something and making it kind of a new thing. But I don't know. I think Kerosine deserves some love, and that's really all I gotta say. Sorry for wasting your time. Thank you. Bye.
Well, thank you for the calls, Situated Night. I hope it wasn't me who was talking shit about Kerosine back in the day. You're vague about that, but I hope this episode laid to rest.
Me either. I think he's a net good addition to this.
Yeah, like, clearly my problem with the game isn't Kerosine. So, like, and as far as your theories go, like, I think that's what's fun about Donkey Kong in particular, because they give you just enough where you can kind of form your own theories, which feel just as plausible as anything else. And whether or not other fans draw those same conclusions or connections, it's all kind of nebulous enough, and it doesn't contradict itself, that it's just something you keep coming back to. And I enjoyed hearing your theories about Kerosine. You know, one aspect of Kerosine we did not discuss, Cameron, is what connection he might have had to the dragon in what became Banjo Pilot, but of course started life
Steamy.
Well, in the track Steamy Vents, yes, we've dubbed the dragon Steamy as a result, but yes, there is a dragon in there that looks visually similar to Kerosine, although it is clearly a dragon and not just a Kremling, like a very buff.
I feel like if you get a good look at him, I kind of suspect that he's like Crunch's model from Diddy Kong Pilot, just tweaked slightly.
Yeah. So, of course, the Banjo Pilot we know is the 2003 build of Diddy Kong Pilot. And, I'm just wondering if there was an intentional, like, homage to Kerosine in there. Or maybe Kerosine is based on that dragon, given the timeline of the development. Because even though this game came out first, of course, Diddy Kong Pilot was in development long before this was even a twinkle in the team's eye. So,
yeah, at the very least, like, dragon, like Kremlings, like, were in the ether. Like, Kerosine's kind of like more kaiju-ish, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, a little bit.
Mine's a little muddy.
The fact that you fight him on top of a giant building.
And then Dogadon's a dragonfly, so...
Right. My question I had for Courtney is Dogadon supposed to be a flitter boss? Doesn't
I guess
really
that would track,
work.
Yeah, since the first world is an army.
Yeah. But thank you for the calls, and no, you will not hear us besmirch Kerosine. I might prefer the surprise of Stronghold Showdown, but I'm completely fine with Kerosine existing as is. And it was great to hear your perspective too, of really coming into the Donkey Kong series. Like I said, like I know these games are foundational for so many people, and I mean, I'm really thankful they exist. All right, let's take our second call.
Hey there, Hyle and Cameron. This is Slingblade from off of the DK Vine forums, calling in to discuss DKC2 GBA. So when I was growing up in the middle of nowhere in the early 2000s, my cousin had Donkey Kong Country on Super Nintendo, and I fell in love with it, obviously. I knew there was a sequel, but nobody around me owned it, and I never came across it when we'd go to pawn shops or anything. My sister made friends with someone who owned DKC3, so I got to see that and fall in love with it too. And I even actually traded in one of my brother's games to a kid at school who claimed he had DKC2, but he was wrong and he just gave me a copy of DKC1. So it remained out of my reach for years, and because of that it attained this like mythical status of this game, you know, that I couldn't have and I wanted to play. I still don't think my brother's forgiven me for that. But because of that, when the GBA version came along, I was so excited to finally be able to just walk into a store and buy it. And it was everything I'd had to hear people gush about online all those years of, you know, a regular masterpiece of a game. I was obsessed. I spent so many hours on long car rides playing it over and over. I still associate a lot of the songs that were on the radio on those trips with levels in that game. So, even though it's arguably the game in the trilogy that suffers the most in the move from Super Nintendo to GBA, with the bright colors and the wordy cutscenes and the Kerosine moments all taken away from its tone, it's still easily the one I'm most glad about existing. You know, all those ports were invaluable to my childhood. Anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing the deep dive on this version of the game. I'll leave off with one small question for you. Why do you think Kerosine looks so out of place? Even as a kid, I could tell he didn't really match the rest of the graphics. So, Thanks, and cheers to 25 years.
Well, thank you for the call, Slingblade. And I feel like we already touched upon this. It's because Kerosine is an original asset and not just scraped artwork from wherever Rare could repurpose the original sprites. So
your story is very sweet, though. This is basically the exact case of why I'm glad this remake exists.
Yeah, I mean, it's also worthy to keep in mind too that like this is before older games were readily accessible on Nintendo systems, right? This was before the Wii. This is before the Virtual Console. This is before the eShop. This is before Nintendo Switch Online. And so you could either emulate the original ones, you could track them down, or you would get these remakes. And it really was, like I said, it kept that flame alive. It really helped make the entire Donkey Kong Country trilogy continue to be relevant in the aughts and find a new generation of fans. And, you know, like that first one, the 2003 GBA remake for the first game, that was the best-selling Donkey Kong game of that decade. So they still did the job. They still got, you know, people excited. They still brought in eyeballs and fans. And, I'm really, really great to hear, you know, your story and our first caller's story. So yeah, thanks for the call. All right, let's take our third caller.
Hello, Kongversation. This is TJ, and I'm calling in to discuss the Game Boy Advance version of Donkey Kong Country 2. So, I say this every time I call in, but yeah, Donkey Kong Country, DK64, Diddy Kong Racing, those were huge parts of my very, very young childhood, some of the earliest games I played. I actually didn't play much of the second one until the Game Boy Advance version. My first time with DKC2, I believe my grandma and I were at a motel, and that was back when motels had plugged-in games you could rent, and we rented DKC2, and that was my first time knowing that there was another Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo. But up until the GBA remakes, where I was a bit older and I could play games on my own terms, and I was a lot more competent, and I actually tried to beat them. I didn't have much experience with the second one until then. And that being said, I was racking my brain trying to have some really highly detailed explanation for it, because I know what I'm about to say is kind of sacrilegious, but I think the GBA versions of the DKC trilogy, they're probably my preferred ways of playing. They're just the ones they're the glove that fits me just right. I love games in general, of course, and when they came to Switch Online, I played through all of them. But something about the GBA versions, I guess just because they are the ones that I was exposed to first, the physics in them, yeah, I gravitate to them more, a little bit. It's not by a lot, it's just a little bit. They're the ones that feel more at home to me. And there's a lot of things about the presentation that I prefer. I like that you're partner Kong on a moving platform. They don't float in the air like in the SNES version. They stick right beside you. I like that both Kongs ride the animal buddies. So, I know the graphics and music definitely take a hit, but I think there's a lot of merit to what the GBA versions do add. I like the additional boss. I like the additional world. Well, that's jumping to DKC3, but I do like a lot of the bells and whistles they add. And I'll say this, I unfortunately, even though I did beat it back then, I had to part ways with that cartridge because a kid at summer camp didn't follow through with his trade. I lent it to him. He said he was going to give me his copy of Sonic Battle. He never bought Sonic Battle, never bought DKC2 back, and I never let it go. It's probably like well over 20 years later. Ugh. Well, so I guess if there's one other thing I should say, one area that I thought was a missed opportunity with the GBA remakes, the same way DKC1 had hero mode, would have been cool if DKC2 GBA gave you like a Donkey Kong mode, let you play as Donkey Kong by himself through the whole campaign. I know it's Diddy Kong's game, but it's Donkey Kong's trilogy. That would have been a cool feature. But not much else to add. So thanks for taking the call. Love DKC2 GBA.
Well, thank you for the call, TJ. And yeah, it's perfectly valid to like these versions more than the original Super Nintendo versions. I mean, that is fine.
Yeah.
If this is what you were first introduced to, or even if this is just what resonates with you more, like there's no correct opinion here. It's all just down to personal taste and preference. And that's why
Yeah.
I really want these versions on NSO. I mean, I think that they're putting the Super Mario Advance games on NSO, and these games do enough differently to justify their presence, their existence on the platform alongside the Super Nintendo cousins. So go for it. I mean, get them on there for historical archiving purposes.
Completely agree. I feel like I'm all for preservation, even of things that are not the ideal vision of the series, because they can hold personal meaning for stuff like this, and just the historical context is fascinating.
Right. And if you have just played through the original versions so many times, you could always just think of this as like Adventure 2, just a slightly remixed take on something by heart. So it has its merit too, even if you are just intimately in love with the original. Like, get it on there and, let people make up their minds for themselves. All right, one more call. It's not a long one. It's just a few seconds long. Let's hear what they have to say.
Why the fuck have we not found the rare cow in this game yet?
Well, thank you for the call. Please state your name next time. I have no idea who this person is, and I feel like I can't talk to them as a human being as a result. So,
I feel like Funky should have dropped the rare cow on K. Rool in that ending.
You know what? I would have been fine with that ending. That would have been, I think, an improvement, honestly. No, wrapping things up here, because we've spent a very long time talking about Donkey Kong Country 2 for the Game Boy Advance. Like all of the DKC GBA games. Like, personally, and I know you feel the same way, Cameron, I really appreciate what this one provided. Not only us, but the fandom as a whole, and that it existed at all, because it did do quite a bit, as I said, in keeping the spirit of Donkey Kong Country alive at a time when it felt it's at its most threatened. But it also, and we didn't bring this up before, I also feel like it helped repopularize the character of Dixie Kong. Because from a certain point of view, this was Dixie's first appearance in a video game in nearly 7 years. She last appeared in Donkey Kong Land 3 in 1997. And this is a debatable trivia point because in Japan, this game came out the exact same day as Donkey Konga 2 for some reason, but they had to delay it in the States until November. And Payon, of course, was working on King of Swing, which would include Dixie as well. But I feel like out of the three, this is the game that made the biggest impact, at least on the culture. It definitely left the biggest impression on people. And I feel like we owe it to this for Dixie Kong really becoming part of the main cast again. Because she was pushed out in Donkey Kong 64, and I know Rare was going to bring her back in Diddy Kong Pilot, but that didn't happen, did it? So I really do look at as this game as when Dixie really sort of started to cement herself. And, I mean, I know she won't be used in every appearance. She wasn't in Donkey Kong Country Returns, but she came back in Tropical Freeze. And now she's just a core pillar of the cast. You know, she's got an animatronic at the theme park. You just can't imagine the Donkey Kong series without her at this point. And it really did start here, at least from a public perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
And I also just really like the little details, like having that prototype gyrocopter or an appearance by 10 Tiny Kongs. To say nothing of the return of Espresso and Candy, this game really helped make the entire Donkey Kong series feel a little bit more cohesive and complete, at least as it existed up until that point. Like, I know I complained about the tone and how it felt more cartoony and slapsticky like Donkey Kong 64, but it was sort of a middle ground between the two presentations. And I just like all the little character and continuity flourishes that it did in like threading them together.
Yeah, while it's a little incongruous, and we complain plenty about that, I do appreciate and did appreciate at the time that like roping in stuff from DK64 made it feel like this was still an evolving, like the history of the Donkey Kong Country franchise was still evolving, even though it was like stuck stagnating with like remakes of games that came before and spin-offs at this time.
Yeah. It definitely felt like there was a little forward momentum, even if it was just retelling the same stories again and again. You definitely understand after DKC 3 why this team really felt like they were ready to handle a new Donkey Kong Country game, which of course did happen, not from this team, not from this studio, but it did happen as a result of these games. Like, some of the new stuff I could have done without, like I said, 28 more hero coins really diluted that concept. I did like the golden feathers. I did like the photographs. I do like Kerosine. Let's set the record straight there, people. But there's just no getting around that it does suffer in direct comparison to the Super Nintendo version. I mean, TJ brought up some good points about how they like cleaned up some of the animations with how the partner Kong like follows along. I do appreciate that, but you know, when you get down to just brass tacks, the mood of Donkey Kong Country 2 is one of the most evocative atmospheres on that console. And so to have that like necessary changes like the lightened screen, like the ambiance differences in like time of day, for example, I understand that. And I kind of just make the allowances for that because yeah, they really should have had a backlight on the GBA from the start. And they didn't correct that until the SP. But you know, they had to make this for that original hardware, and it is what it is. But did they have to bulldoze the ending? Did they have to take a lot of the deeply resonant moments from the game, like, which really just, like, went above the weight class for a cartoony game starring two monkeys, and just drag it down in some of that cartoony silliness? The ending, Cameron, I could find good things to say about even the things I don't necessarily agree with. That's one of my skills as a fan, as a Donkey Kong fan, is I always look at the glass half full. But when that glass is half full of putrid ass water, like it is with this ending, then I have nothing good to say. And I typically like to conclude episodes of the Kongversation on a high note, or on an uplifting feeling, at the very least a pithy joke or a one-liner. So I guess the irony is that this episode's ending is putrid ass water as well. Happy holidays from all of us at DK Vine.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.